Cersei Lannister was 13 years old when the prospect of her marriage to Renly Baratheon first surfaced. She had hardly ceased being a girl, though she wore her womanhood like a new garment, self-consciously proud yet uncertain in her movements, awake to the shift in how men looked at her but still unsure how best to wield that attention. She remembered the day Lord Tywin, her father, spoke quietly of a potential alliance with House Baratheon. At the time, she had little reason to think further about which brother she might wed. Every rumor had pegged her for Robert, the heir, the boisterous young man who roared into every room as if he already wore a crown. But Tywin Lannister had his reasons, as he always did, and it was not Robert whose name left his lips when the decision was finalized. Cersei was to marry Renly Baratheon, the youngest brother, scarcely older than she but already proud under his dark hair and storm-blue eyes. On the day she learned of her betrothal, Cersei felt the thrill of ambition running through her. To be a queen, or at least a queen consort in the future, was the dream of any noble girl who had been told all her life that her beauty could move kings and shape destinies. But Renly was not the one in line for the throne. Robert was the oldest Baratheon brother, and Stannis stood between Robert and Renly. Yet her father knew how to play the long game. Tywin Lannister would speak of advantage of forging strong bonds with the most powerful family in the realm. A marriage to Robert might be more obvious, but Renly was said to be clever, charismatic in his own right, and Tywin's spies had whispered that the boy had a certain charm that could make even the most distant lords open their hearts. Perhaps it was for that reason that Tywin pressed forward with the match. Or perhaps the rumors were too strong. Robert Baratheon had his heart fixed upon a girl of the north named Lyanna Stark, and Tywin did not wish to see his daughter languish while the older Baratheon chased half-impossible dreams. So, by the time Cersei was 14, she found herself betrothed to a boy she had never met, one who lived far away at Storm's End. She spent hours in her chamber imagining the Stormlands in all their wild wonder, the cliffs battered by roiling seas, the storm-lashed towers, the gloom of the skies above. She pictured herself there, dressed in Lannister crimson, her golden hair shining like a promise of summer. In the pages of her mind, Renly was tall and gallant and unshakably confident, as all Baratheons were rumored to be. She would tell herself this marriage would be her stepping stone to grandeur. She vowed she would make her father proud, prove herself a true daughter of Tywin Lannister. Each night, alone in her bed, she whispered her own name over and over, matched with his. Cersei Baratheon, she said, with a testing lilt to her voice until it sounded like a power all its own. Their first meeting came at King's Landing on the day they were officially betrothed before the court. Renly was only a few months older than Cersei, both were in the tender cusp of their youth. Yet, if he felt any awkwardness, he did not show it. He smiled brilliantly, revealed that perfect line of white teeth, and bowed before her in a practiced flourish that made the other ladies titter behind their hands. Cersei had expected someone more boisterous, more like Robert, but Renly was smooth. His courtly manners were impeccable, and he complimented her gown, admired her hair, said something witty about the color gold being a perfect reflection of House Lannister's magnificence. He had a way of drawing laughter from the onlookers, from the ladies and lords who always circled the edges of such events. Cersei, for her part, kept her chin high. She had learned early on that a lady of House Lannister should never look uncertain in public. Her father had taught her that power was as much about how others perceived you as anything else. If there was any part of her that quivered at the newness of it all, at the ring slid onto her finger with its Baratheon stag carved from onyx, she hid it beneath a cool facade. In that moment, she realized how easy it was to wrap a false serenity around herself like a cloak. Renly would see only what she showed him. When the wedding day arrived the following year, it was in the Red Keep under King Aerys II Targaryen's dispassionate gaze. Though Tywin had once been the hand of the king, the Mad King's moods were mercurial at best. He allowed the grand wedding mostly because it amused him to watch the great houses bend themselves in knots for alliances that might someday challenge his own shaky reign. There was a subdued sense of caution among the guests, for one never knew what might spark Aerys's wrath. Yet the beauty of the ceremony outshone all. People spoke in hushed tones of the bride's gown, a shimmering Lannister red offset by black and gold embroidery of roaring lions. It was said she wore rubies in her hair and that she looked like something carved from the heart of a flame. Renly, though not yet the strapping man he would become, was regal in Baratheon black, the golden stag embroidered across his chest. When they spoke their vows, their voices were clear, echoing across the throne room, and for that single day at least, the realm seemed to hold its breath. Afterward, feasting and dancing filled the Red Keep's halls. Cersei found her new husband surprisingly adept at all forms of celebration. He danced with her until her feet ached, then made certain she had a seat and fresh wine to quench her thirst. When she teased him about his lively steps, he winked and said that if one had to endure the storms of Storm's End, then one learned to live with energy, for life could be short if the gods so wished it. It was a jest, but there was a ring of truth to it. Cersei, who had grown up in the wealth and warmth of Casterly Rock, felt a curious delight in the notion of storms and wild seas. Something about Renly's manner drew people in. Throughout the night, their table was never short of visitors wanting to share a story, to toast their union, to comment on the brilliance of House Baratheon and House Lannister combined. Their betting was a nerve-wracking affair for Cersei. She had steeled herself for what she had been told was her duty, for the roars and guffaws of men as she was carried away. The tradition was humiliating, but she wore her practiced mask, refusing to let her fear show even as the ladies-in-waiting unbound her hair. Renly, too, seemed unnerved by it in his own way, though he kept up his charming front. Finally, the doors to their bedchamber closed. They were alone in the flicker of candlelight and the floral perfume that lingered from the wedding feast. Cersei felt a flutter in her stomach, uncertain how to proceed. But her new husband showed a gentle courtesy. He did not rush to claim her, but instead asked if she was comfortable, if she wished for anything. In a realm where men's hunger often overrode consideration, his soft approach soothed her. He had a kind touch. If the consummation was awkward, it was also laced with youthful discovery, and in the morning they both wore private smiles that spoke of something blossoming, however uncertain. Soon enough, they departed for Storm's End. To Cersei's surprise, Tywin Lannister bid her an almost tender farewell. For all his fearsome reputation, the Lord of Casterly Rock knew how to instill confidence in his children when it mattered. He told her quietly that this marriage was a new seat of power for House Lannister. She must never forget that she was, above all, a lion, and lions always commanded fear and respect. She carried that advice with her as the wheelhouse rattled through the Crownlands, heading south and east into the Stormlands. Renly rode beside the caravan sometimes at its head, every so often coming back to poke his head into the wheelhouse and grin at her in a boyish way that reminded her they were both so very young still. Storm's End rose from the cliffs like a fortress hewn out of the sea's fury. The walls were thick, designed to repel siege after siege, storms after storms, and for generations the castle had stood unconquered. Cersei felt a strange intimidation as she gazed upon it. High above, gulls wheeled and screeched, and the ocean's roar was a constant undercurrent beneath the wind. She had grown up in splendor, but the Stormlands had a rugged magnificence that made her heart pound. Renly helped her down from the carriage, introducing her to the courtyard lined with Baratheon knights and bannermen. "Welcome to your new home," he said, offering his arm. She took it, letting him guide her through the gates. In the weeks that followed, Cersei strove to establish herself as the new Lady of Storm's End, though Renly's older brothers loomed large in her awareness. Robert was away on one of his hunts, chasing boars in the Kingswood, or so rumor said. Stannis was a distant figure at Dragonstone, rarely visiting unless called. Renly, by contrast, was the charismatic presence that bound the castle together. Servants and soldiers alike would speak kindly of him, describing how he had a word of thanks or a jest for each man in the yard, how he never forgot to see the stable boys were well fed. He had that gift, and as Cersei watched him navigate the day's tasks, she found herself torn between admiration and a kind of silent jealousy. She had been trained in the arts of political maneuvering and courtesy, but she was also a Lannister who believed in the iron price of fear. Warmth and affability were not the currency with which her father had ruled. She saw in Renly a different style of leadership, and it piqued her interest. Yet Cersei refused to stand idle. She summoned the steward, reevaluated the household accounts, set about ensuring the castle's day-to-day running was as efficient as any in Westeros. When Renly would see her bent over ledgers late in the evening, he teased her gently, but he always ended with a fond grin. "My lady is determined to outshine the Lady of Highgarden in her thoroughness," he would say. It was an affectionate jest, and though Cersei sometimes bristled at the idea she should be placed in competition with other ladies, she could not deny the satisfaction that came from her husband's praise. As the months slipped by, they grew closer in that uncertain way that newlyweds might. There were moments of genuine warmth, nights spent in whispered conversation, confessions of childhood dreams, Cersei longing once to be a Targaryen queen, Renly admitting that he felt overshadowed by his older brothers. She would stroke his dark hair as he murmured these words, feeling a sense of power in that vulnerability he showed her. In turn, she revealed little pieces of her own heart, though always guardedly. She was still a daughter of Tywin Lannister, after all, and trust did not come easily. But day by day, they built a foundation that might, with luck, turn into true partnership. It was well into their second year of marriage when word arrived of a tragedy, Lyanna Stark's disappearance, rumored to have been taken by the Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Robert Baratheon's fury was said to be incandescent, and the realm began to simmer with talk of rebellion. In Storm's End, the news fell like thunder. Cersei watched her husband pace the Great Hall, wrestling with the ramifications. If Robert rose against the crown to get Lyanna back, what would become of the Baratheons standing at court? Where would Storm's End stand? Cersei knew her father would look for advantage in the brewing conflict, but Tywin was no longer hand, and King Aerys's paranoia had run amok. She and Renly were caught in the crosswinds, uncertain whether to pledge themselves openly to Robert's cause or attempt a careful neutrality. Cersei found herself in council with her husband and the Storm landlords who had rallied under the Baratheon banners. Many of them expected Renly to follow his brother without question, to rise in rebellion. Yet Renly hesitated. He was no craven, that much was clear. But he was thoughtful. He recognized that open defiance of the crown would endanger Storm's End. King Aerys would not hesitate to call his loyal lords to crush a Baratheon uprising. At the same time, Robert's rage was unstoppable, and one did not simply oppose the man who might be the new Storm King if he succeeded in toppling the Targaryens. Cersei sat beside Renly, offering quiet suggestions that echoed her father's teachings. She spoke of the necessity of forging alliances: House Arryn, House Stark, possibly even House Tully. The realm was trembling on the edge of a knife, but if they played their cards well, House Baratheon might gain the throne. In the end, the rebellion ignited like wildfire. Robert declared his intention to bring down Rhaegar and the Mad King. Eddard Stark joined him. Jon Arryn, too. The Riverlands soon followed. Stannis took control of Baratheon forces at Dragonstone in the early stages. And though Renly was only a boy lord in the eyes of many, his name carried weight. Despite the hesitations, Storm's End soon prepared for war. Cersei felt her pulse pounding at the realization that this could reshape the entire realm. A victorious Robert might become king. In such a scenario, the entire Baratheon family rose in influence. She and Renly, standing firmly behind Robert, would gain new power. Yet there was one person who overshadowed everything: Tywin Lannister. Cersei's father had stayed out of the conflict for too long, some said, waiting on the sidelines for the perfect moment. He had not declared for the Targaryens nor for Robert. He was biding his time, as was his way. For a moment, Cersei felt trapped between loyalties. She was a Baratheon wife, but she was also a Lannister daughter. If Tywin finally chose a side, it would shift the entire balance of the war. The siege of Storm's End came not from the Targaryens, but from the crown's loyalists in the Reach, led by Mace Tyrell. Renly and Cersei found themselves locked within those formidable walls, with Stannis commanding from Dragonstone and Robert leading the rebel forces across the land. Food grew scarce. The storms battered the castle at night, making sleep a distant memory for many. Yet Storm's End did not fall. Day after day, the Tyrell's army waited outside, hoping to starve the defenders into submission. Within, Cersei found renewed strength in her husband's perseverance. He was no soldier, yet he raised morale by walking the battlements, joking with archers, praising those who rationed food. The small folk adored him for it. Cersei threw herself into the challenge of managing the castle's dwindling supplies, delegating tasks to the cooks, ensuring that every scrap of food was accounted for. Storm's End had withstood long sieges in the past, but the Tyrell host outside was vast, and it became a game of waiting to see who would break first. There were nights when the pang of hunger gnawed at her, nights when she woke to the sound of her own stomach growling. Yet, she refused to complain. She had a role to play, inspiring the garrison by her mere presence. If the Lady of Storm's End could endure, so could they. And she endured with the chilly resolve of a Lannister. When word finally reached them that Robert had triumphed at the Battle of the Trident, slaying Prince Rhaegar and scattering the Targaryen forces, the castle erupted in cautious jubilation. The Tyrell host remained encamped, but the tide was clearly turning. In the final stretch of the war, Tywin Lannister finally marched on King's Landing, sacking the city in an infamous betrayal of the Mad King's trust. Aerys was slain by his own Kingsguard, Jaime Lannister, who would forever be branded as the Kingslayer. The war ended with Robert ascending to the Iron Throne. For the new king's coronation, Storm's End's gates were thrown open at last. The Tyrells bent the knee, and Renly, famished and thinner from the siege, stood beside Cersei on the dais in the Red Keep as Robert took the crown. King Robert Baratheon roared with laughter and exultation, the realm's rightful victor. Stannis stood to one side, grim and stony as always, but no one could question his importance in the final downfall of the Targaryens. Renly, with Cersei at his side, offered his own congratulations to the new king. They were now the royal family, in a sense the Baratheon brothers, unstoppable in their unity. Cersei sensed an undercurrent of tension, however. Stannis seemed uneasy at Storm's End, having gone under siege while he was at Dragonstone. Robert, though joyful in his victory, nursed old scars of losing Lyanna Stark to death in the final days of the rebellion. And Tywin Lannister, freshly re-established as a power in the realm, had orchestrated a cunning plan. The savage sacking of King's Landing and the presentation of the Targaryen children's corpses, all to prove House Lannister's loyalty to the new king. Cersei felt a chill at the memory of those stories, of the brutality inflicted on innocents, but she reminded herself that the realm was won by iron and blood. They were the victors. History would be written in their favor. In the years that followed, King Robert reveled in his triumph, throwing feasts, hunting, and indulging in pleasures of the flesh. Stannis was granted Dragonstone, a bitter consolation, for Storm's End remained in Renly's hands, as if Robert were dismissing Stannis with a wave. Renly and Cersei claimed Storm's End as their seat, though they maintained a presence in King's Landing as well, especially as Renly was made Master of Laws on the small council. So the realm began its slow transition into a new era. It was a time of reconstruction, marriages, alliances, and quiet grumblings. Cersei found court life surprisingly easy to navigate. She had prepared for it all her life, and with Renly at her side, she could display a softer face when needed, or a steely one if required. She learned how to exchange pleasantries with the likes of Varys, Littlefinger, and Pycelle, though each made her skin crawl in different ways. Varys was too cunning by half, always whispering secrets. Littlefinger wore that mocking smile, as if he saw more than he let on. Pycelle simpered like a toady. Yet Cersei adapted, forging alliances with the ladies of the court, ensuring that the Lannister name remained one of prominence even though she herself was now a Baratheon by marriage. She still had her father's ear, though Tywin remained at Casterly Rock, content to let his children shape the court in his image. A year into Robert's reign, Cersei gave birth to a son, naming him Aemon after a legendary Targaryen hero, though some quietly disapproved of a boy carrying such a name in the new regime. Renly insisted he liked the sound of it, that the realm would see it as a sign of healing old wounds. The boy was dark-haired like his father's line, but with a hint of gold in his eyes that marked him as a Lannister descendant. Renly doted on him, carrying him through the halls of Storm's End as if he were the proudest father in all the Seven Kingdoms. Cersei felt a surge of pride as well. Her child was the living embodiment of the alliance between the lion and the stag. He would be raised in a new era, one free of Targaryen tyranny, and perhaps someday he would do great things. As the royal family settled into a routine, a quiet rivalry festered. Stannis's presence remained distant but resentful. He believed Robert had overlooked him, that the Stormlands should rightfully pass to the elder brother should Robert have no heirs, or that a seat as paramount lord was his due. Yet Robert had granted Storm's End to Renly after the war, a fact that rankled Stannis to no end. Cersei saw that old wound deepen each time they crossed paths. Renly tried to placate his brother with courtesy, sometimes a lavish gift, or words of respect. But Stannis's eyes remained cool, and Cersei recognized bitterness in him. She knew a man scorned did not forget easily. Nonetheless, life carried on. Robert's court grew notorious for its extravagance. Tournaments became frequent, partly funded by House Lannister's gold, for the crown's coffers were never as flush as the Lannisters. Cersei learned how to spin the illusions of plenty, ensuring that each visiting lord would return to his seat convinced of the court's magnificence. Behind closed doors, she cautioned her husband about the crown's growing debts. But Renly, though he listened, sometimes allowed himself to be swept up by the tide of Robert's revelry. He was, after all, still young and fond of good times. Cersei's second child, a daughter named Joanna after her late mother, arrived 3 years into Robert's reign. This child carried more Lannister traits. The bright golden hair, so dazzling that even Robert commented on it during one of his visits. A little lioness in Baratheon clothing, he joked, ruffling her infant curls while reeking of ale. Cersei did not mind. Let the world see the lion's pride shining out of her daughter. Renly, for his part, was thrilled to have both a son and a daughter, believing it made their union complete. He lavished attention upon them both, a stark contrast to how Robert neglected his own bastards scattered about the realm. But beneath the surface peace, tensions flared. Robert's appetite for wine, feasting, and women grew more infamous. The small council whispered about the cost, about how the realm was sliding toward unrest. The remnants of the Targaryen supporters whispered about Viserys and Daenerys, the two surviving children of the Mad King who had fled across the Narrow Sea. Though they were still children, some whispered they might one day return with an army. King Robert dismissed these concerns with a wave of his hand, but Stannis, from Dragonstone, demanded more vigilance. Renly tried to mediate, reminding Robert that if any threat emerged, the combined might of the realm would snuff it out. In these uneasy years, Cersei found herself stepping more confidently into the role of a political figure. She maneuvered among the lords, forging alliances through quiet words and shared dinners. She cultivated the Tyrells, particularly Margaery Tyrell, who was near her own age and fascinated by the idea of forging a strong bond between Highgarden and Storm's End. She invited the Redwyne twins to Storm's End for feasts, ensuring their loyalty. She corresponded with her father regularly, updating him on the court's fractures, always seeking his counsel while trying to prove she could stand on her own. Tywin's replies came infrequently, but they were always to the point, reminding her to think 3 steps ahead. When little Aemon reached his 5th name day, a grand tournament was held at Storm's End in his honor. Knights and lords from all across Westeros arrived to compete. The lists were filled with illustrious names. The Hound, Sandor Clegane, who served as Joffrey Baratheon's sworn shield. The Red Viper of Dorne, Oberyn Martell, who had come perhaps as much to sharpen his spear as to enjoy the spectacle. Ser Barristan Selmy, still serving as Lord Commander of Robert's Kingsguard, and many others. Cersei stood on the viewing platform beside Renly, with young Aemon on her lap, enthralled by the shining armor and the thunder of hooves. The boy cheered whenever a knight in Baratheon colors unhorsed another, and Cersei found herself smiling to see her son so full of delight. Renly was at ease, clapping and laughing with the lords who joined them. Yet, from the corner of her eye, Cersei caught sight of Stannis standing in a dour silence. He had arrived that morning from Dragonstone, apparently at Robert's behest, but he looked as though he would rather be anywhere else. There was an older bitterness in his eyes, a tension that made Cersei uneasy. Over the years, he had grown grimmer, and rumors said he consorted with a red priestess from Ass High, though no one dared speak of it openly at court yet. Whenever her gaze swept toward him, Stannis's lips pressed thin. She wondered what resentments churned behind those eyes. When the jousting ended and the feasting began, Aemon was whisked away by his maids to be put to bed, exhausted from the excitement. Cersei mingled among the highborn guests, exchanging pleasantries, noting alliances and feuds. She saw how Mace Tyrell boasted endlessly about the prosperity of the Reach, how the Dornish knights eyed him with thinly veiled contempt, how the northern lords in attendance spoke quietly among themselves. She could sense that peace was a fragile veneer. There were 1,000 cracks beneath it, each one a potential flashpoint for future conflict. She told herself that she and Renly needed to remain vigilant and united. If Robert's reign faltered, the realm would look to the other Baratheons. Some might look to Stannis, but many, enthralled by charisma, would turn to Renly. Cersei's perspective changed abruptly the next morning, when a messenger from King's Landing arrived with news. King Robert had been gravely injured in a hunting accident. A boar had gored him, leaving him near death. The messenger urged the Baratheons to come with haste, for none knew how long the king would last. The entire tournament atmosphere soured instantly. Renly exchanged a tense glance with Cersei, then hurriedly commanded the courtyard to be readied. They would depart for King's Landing within the hour. Stannis, overhearing the news, went pale. For all his resentments, the possibility of Robert's death set a new dread in his gaze. The journey north was fraught with anxiety, each day bringing another rumor. By the time they reached the city, the bells were tolling. Robert was still alive, but barely. He lay in his bedchamber, surrounded by maesters and watchful courtiers, reeking of wine and blood. Renly rushed to his bedside, and Cersei followed. She had never particularly liked Robert. His crass, boisterous nature reminded her of everything she found lacking in true rulers, but to see the once mighty man laid low was a shock. His face was ashen, his words slurred by pain and milk of the poppy. He recognized Renly and managed a weak smile. "Your brother," Robert croaked, "your sweet brother is here, Cersei. And my good sister, you've both come." He trailed off into a racking cough. Renly tried to offer him comfort, but Robert shrugged away the hand that offered water. Not like this," he whispered. Before long, Grand Maester Pycelle and the others ushered them out. Only a select few were allowed to remain by the king's side. As they waited in a nearby chamber, Stannis joined them, his face grim. He said nothing, merely stood with arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. Cersei felt that old tension rising. If Robert died without a legitimate heir, the throne would naturally pass to the next brother, or so tradition might suggest. But the realm was complicated. Some might argue that a great council should convene, or that other claimants could emerge. She thought of her father in Casterly Rock and wondered if Tywin might press for an arrangement. It was late at night when Pycelle finally emerged. Robert was dead, the boar's wound having proven too grievous. Renly sank into a chair, stunned, tears filling his eyes for the brother he had idolized all his life. Stannis's face was unreadable, though he had never gotten along with Robert. The finality of death still weighed heavily. Cersei stood behind Renly, resting a hand on his shoulder. She could feel him trembling as the reality set in. By dawn, news of the king's death spread through King's Landing like wildfire. Mourners filled the streets, though many also whispered anxiously about succession. The city was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The small council convened. By rights of birth, Stannis was the eldest remaining Baratheon brother, and so the crown should pass to him. Yet, in the halls of power, many lords and courtiers grumbled that Stannis was dour, uncharismatic, and ill-suited to keep the realm stable. Renly, younger though he was, possessed a charm that could keep the 7 kingdoms at peace. Some demanded a great council, others urged immediate recognition of Stannis. In that swirl of chaos, Cersei's mind raced. She and Renly had children together, Aemon and Joanna. If Renly were to ascend, their children would be in line to inherit. A moment of pure ambition flared in her breast. She thought of her father's lessons: if you wish to seize power, do not hesitate. And Renly, though stunned by grief, was not without supporters. Half the city seemed to love him, and the memory of his kindness left a warm impression on many. The question was, would Stannis allow it? Or would the realm tear itself apart over the rightful heir? That same day, Stannis confronted Renly in the chamber once used for small council meetings. Cersei was present, as were several other lords, including Littlefinger, Varys, and Pycelle. The tension was palpable. Stannis demanded that all recognize him as king of the Undulls and the First Men. "I am Robert's heir," he said in his clipped tones. "I will have no debate about this." He turned to Renly, his gaze flicking once to Cersei. "Bend the knee and you may keep Storm's End or even serve as my hand. But let us have none of this nonsense about you claiming the throne." Renly stiffened, perhaps thinking of their childhood squabbles or of the mild humiliations Stannis had subjected him to. "Brother," he began, "you know I loved Robert as dearly as you did, but we must think of what's best for the realm. The lords might not stand behind you. We risk war if we're not united. Our houses could split, eh?" Stannis cut him off, voice tight with anger. "You speak of what's best for the realm, but you really mean what's best for yourself." He glowered at Cersei as well, as though she had orchestrated some scheme. "I see the hand of Tywin Lannister in this, or perhaps your cunning alone. But you will not usurp my rights." Fear and determination battled in Cersei's chest. She knew how easily a bloody conflict might erupt. The memory of Robert's rebellion was still fresh in many minds. She placed a hand on Renly's forearm and spoke, calm and measured. "My lord Stannis, none doubt your claim by rights of birth. Yet there is more to kingship than birth alone. The realm needs a ruler whom all will follow. We must find a solution that avoids destroying the peace that Robert fought so hard to create." Stannis's face twisted. "Peace? Is that what you call it when the crown's debts spiral out of control and feasts overshadow our responsibilities? This court is rotten at its core, filled with sycophants. I will cleanse it of corruption, with or without your blessing. And if anyone resists, then they are traitors and they shall be dealt with as such." That left a ringing silence in the room. Renly's eyes flicked to the lords present. Many looked uncertain, not wanting to provoke Stannis but also not eager to follow him. Littlefinger toyed with his beard, eyes darting between the brothers, perhaps weighing which side would better suit his ambitions. Varys observed with that inscrutable half-smile, while Pycelle coughed politely as if to excuse himself from offering any real opinion. In the end, no blood was shed that day. Stannis departed King's Landing at once, returning to Dragonstone. Renly, shaken by the confrontation, retreated to his chambers with Cersei. Alone, he sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "Gods, he'll raise banners, won't he?" Renly murmured. "He'll claim I'm usurping his birthright." Cersei knelt before him, resting a hand on his knee. She was torn. If Stannis took the throne, her influence would wane drastically. But if Renly claimed the throne, the realm might plunge into civil war. She recalled her father's words, "Any man who must say, 'I am king,' is no true king." But did that mean she should let Stannis have his way? She found no easy answer. Instead, she said quietly, "You have many friends in the city, my lord. Let us see how the wind blows before we make any rash decisions." Yet, that same night, key lords and knights, including some from the Reach, came to Renly in secret. They spoke of a desire for a king who could unite the realm as Robert once did, a king who could charm both highborn and small folk, who could keep the peace with House Lannister's gold as an ally. They worried that Stannis' stern nature would alienate too many lords, especially those who had grown used to Robert's indulgences. Rumors abounded that House Tyrell would prefer Renly on the throne, for a match with Margaery Tyrell might strengthen that tie. When those lords left, Renly turned to Cersei, eyes bright with a feverish determination. "They believe in me. They truly do. They see Stannis as too rigid to rule." Cersei's heart thudded. She saw the possibilities. If Renly truly marched on King's Landing and claimed the throne, she would be queen. Her children would be royalty beyond question, heirs to the Iron Throne, not just some keep or lesser seat. She thought of Aemon's wide eyes and Joanna's golden curls. "If you accept this path," she said carefully, "we must be prepared for war. Stannis will not bend the knee, not ever. And who knows what other claimants might emerge." Renly stood straighter, the flicker of ambition in his gaze. "We have the gold of Casterly Rock," he said, "and we have the love of the people. I can rally the Stormlords, the Reach, and likely the Westerlands through your father's alliance. That's more than Stannis can muster." Cersei swallowed her doubts. In truth, the notion of becoming queen, of seeing her children on the throne, called to every ambition she had ever nurtured. She pressed her lips together and said, "Then we must make haste and secure those alliances. We cannot delay." Within a fortnight, Renly sent out ravens, forging ties with Mace Tyrell and the Lords of the Reach, securing promises of swords and supplies. A formal betrothal was arranged between Renly, recently widowed, some jested darkly, for Robert's demise had left him the heir, and Margaery Tyrell. The rumor was that Mace desired to see his daughter a queen, but the small detail that Renly was already married to Cersei Lannister complicated matters. That was where the cunning came in. Renly argued that, in times of succession crises, polygamous arrangements had been rumored in ancient Targaryen days, though rarely recognized. Cersei felt a spike of anger at the suggestion that she be set aside. But Renly would not easily discard her either. Their marriage was recognized by the faith, they had children. So the talk of a second wedding remained rumor. Cersei firmly maneuvered to ensure it never became reality. She had no interest in sharing her husband's bed with a woman from Highgarden, no matter how sweetly Margaery smiled. Still, alliances were alliances, and Margaery was a vital piece in winning the Tyrell's might. Cersei swallowed her pride and worked to keep the Tyrell lords on Renly's side. She dined with Lady Alysanne and Lady Janna, presented them with small gifts, assured them that if Renly wore the crown, Highgarden would have a favored place at court. In exchange, gold and men poured into Renly's cause. Meanwhile, Stannis holed himself away on Dragonstone, mustering a navy and forging an alliance with the Red Priestess rumored to wield dark powers. As for the Lannisters, Tywin did not commit openly. He watched from Casterly Rock, letting the two Baratheons posture. He hinted to Cersei in a coded letter that he would support her husband if it seemed the winning side, but only when victory looked certain. Casterly Rock would not move prematurely. It would crush whichever threat remained if the conflict began to weaken one or both sides. That was Tywin's way, calculating, patient, ruthless. The letter ended with a single line that made her chest tighten. "Do not lose," were loomed. Whispers of black magic at Dragonstone grew. Renly's host gathered in the Reach, Tens of thousands under green banners with the golden rose entwined with the crowned stag of Baratheon. Knights, squires, men-at-arms, all eager to follow the charismatic lord who had once graced every tournament with cheer. Cersei stood beside him on a dais at Highgarden, seeing the lines of soldiers stretching far beyond the horizon. She felt a surge of pride. This was a great force, far larger than anything Stannis could muster. Perhaps the realm truly belonged to Renly now. On the eve of their march toward King's Landing to claim the throne by force, Cersei and Renly strolled through a moonlit garden. Margaery Tyrell walked a step behind, an ever-present fixture. But when the conversation turned private, the girl slipped away, leaving them alone amid the wafting scent of roses. Cersei took Renly's hand, remembering the boy who had once teased her about dancing. He was no longer that boy. A man stood beside her, crowned with ambition, yes, but also with a sense of purpose. "Tomorrow," Renly said softly, "we begin the final steps. If all goes well, I shall sit the Iron Throne." Cersei pressed her lips together. "And if it doesn't go well?" He drew her close. "We have come too far to fail now. The realm needs stability, not Stannis' tyranny. And our children, I want them to grow up with pride, not overshadowed by a bitter uncle." In that moment, Cersei saw the idealism that still flickered in Renly's eyes. She wondered if he fully understood the cost of war, the blood that would be spilled. Yet she also realized how deeply she did not want to see him broken by heartbreak or defeat. She wanted to stand victorious beside him, the realm's new power couple. She tilted her head, pressing a quick kiss to his lips. "I will do everything in my power to ensure your success. I am your wife, after all. Your partner in all things." Renly smiled, though a hint of worry marred his expression. "Yes, and I yours." They retired to their respective chambers afterward, but Cersei found sleep elusive. She roamed the corridors of Highgarden in a cloak, ignoring the curious gazes of a few guards. In her restless mind, she weighed the possibility of Stannis unleashing dark sorceries, of Tywin waiting to see if her cause faltered, of the iron price that might be demanded to sit the throne. She thought of her children, safe at Storm's End for now. If she failed, if Renly fell, what would become of them? The shadows cast by the torches seemed long and menacing. But she reminded herself she was a lion of House Lannister and now of House Baratheon as well. She would not cower. Dawn broke over the rolling hills, bathing the encamped army in pale gold. The horns sounded, men broke their fast hurriedly, and the standard-bearers lifted high the stag and rose. Cersei stood with Margaery Tyrell on a platform to watch them depart, row after row of knights and foot soldiers. Renly led the van, his armor gleaming in the early light. Before he rode off, he turned in the saddle to look back at Cersei. She lifted a hand in farewell, forcing a confident smile she did not entirely feel. He nodded, as if bolstered by her presence, then spurred his horse forward. She would follow soon after with the baggage train and a retinue of ladies, escorted by a contingent of guards. Such was the protocol. No queen or would-be queen could be risked in the vanguard of battle. Yet Cersei longed to ride at Renly's side to show the realm she was no timid consort. But she played the part expected of her, reminding G herself that once Renly was crowned, she would have ample opportunity to demonstrate her power. The march toward the capital was slow, methodical. Scouts brought back word of King's Landing in chaos, with half the city uncertain whether to fear Stannis, Renly, or the possibility of Lannister intervention. A few daring men even claimed to have seen monstrous shadows in the night near the Rose Road, though that was dismissed as drunken fancy. Step by step, the army drew closer, and Cersei felt the tension grow. She knew that a single misstep could send the realm spiraling into anarchy. She dreaded a siege of King's Landing, imagining the carnage that might occur. But Renly was confident that the city would open its gates once they saw the might of his host, for who would risk death in a futile resistance? 2 days from the city, a raven arrived from Dragonstone. It bore no crest, just a simple black seal. Renly read the letter in his pavilion, his face growing thunderous. Cersei had been invited to witness. After a moment, he handed her the parchment. She scanned Stannis' handwriting. It was a declaration of war, a formal condemnation of Renly's usurpation, and a dark promise that the Lord of Dragonstone would bring the justice of the one true king upon all traitors. Stannis had sealed it with the sigil of a flaming heart, a symbol many did not yet recognize. But Cersei had heard rumors of a new religion, Lawler, the Lord of Light, that Stannis had embraced. Renly crushed the parchment in his fist. He's turned to foreign gods. He'll call me a heretic next, he muttered. Then he drew in a steadying breath. No matter. We have the bigger army, the better alliances. He paused, glancing at Cersei. This is how it must be. The realm isn't big enough for 2 kings. That night, as the men made camp, a brooding hush fell. Even the usual laughter of the soldiers around the fires was subdued. Cersei wandered among them, offering kind words or a gracious nod here and there. She could sense their worry. They would be fighting fellow Baratheon men, possibly, or lords who had once served King Robert. Now they would be pitted against each other in a brutal contest of kingship. She felt the burden heavy on her shoulders. On returning to her tent, she found Margaery Tyrell waiting with a pitcher of wine. The girl offered her a cup, giving a slight curtsy. My lady, Margaery said in her soft voice, I thought you might welcome a companion tonight. Cersei eyed her warily. Ever since the rumors that Mace Tyrell wanted Margaery to wed Renly, Cersei had viewed the girl as a potential rival. But Margaery had never shown open hostility. She was all gentle smiles, delicate compliments, and subtle cunning. Thank you, Cersei said, taking the cup. Margaery poured one for herself as well. My father is quite determined that House Tyrell stands with Renly. We've heard the whisperings that Stannis delves into dark arts. Folk talk of shadows moving across the waves near Dragonstone, whispering old, forbidden prayers. They say the Red Woman calls upon a foreign god for power. Cersei felt a chill. Dark arts or not, Stannis is no fool. He'll strike where we're weakest. Margaery nodded, eyes downcast. Yes, he will. But if the Stormlands and the Reach are united, if the Lannisters lend their gold, how could he hope to stand against that? Silence stretched as they both sipped their wine. Cersei considered the question. She thought of her father's letter, do not lose. That was the stance House Lannister would take. She forced a calm expression. Indeed. Let us hope reason prevails before too much blood is spilled. But something in her tone told Margaery she did not believe in that hope too strongly. Come morning, Renly's host resumed its march. By midday, they reached the fields outside King's Landing, spreading out like a living sea of banners and steel. From the city walls, watchers stood gaping at the sight. Then, to everyone's surprise, the gates opened. A delegation rode forth under a white banner, among them Ser Barristan and Selmy, who had remained in the city after Robert's death. He approached Renly's vanguard, calling for a parley. Renly dismounted and spoke with Selmy in low tones. Cersei edged close enough to catch fragments of the conversation. The city was leaderless, with the small council paralyzed by the fear that Stannis' forces might attack from the sea. The gold cloaks were uncertain where their loyalty lay. Many were inclined to simply open the gates to whoever showed the greater force. If Renly would swear to preserve peace and not loot the city, they would let him enter. Cersei watched the ripple of relief on Renly's face. This was what he had hoped for, a bloodless entry. Thus, in a swirl of banners, Renly Baratheon and Cersei Lannister rode at the head of their host through the gates of King's Landing. Citizens peered from windows, some cheering, some fearful. Step by step, the city that had once been Robert's, then briefly no one's, came under Renly's control. The gold cloaks begrudgingly acknowledged him as their liege. The small council, minus a few missing members, tried to greet him formally. Littlefinger, sly as ever, knelt and swore fealty. Varys offered a flowery speech about unity and harmony. Pycelle tottered and proclaimed that the gods had surely willed this peaceful transfer of power. Only the empty throne stood as a silent witness. That evening, in the Red Keep's throne room, Renly ascended the Iron Throne. He wore his finest armor, the crowned stag on his breast, and a cloak of Baratheon black trimmed with gold. The great lords who had marched with him, Mace Tyrell, Randall Tarley, Mathis Rowan, gathered around, proclaiming him king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Cersei stood at his side, her heart pounding with a heady mix of triumph and apprehension. She glanced at the spiked iron seat that had cost so many men their lives. If Stannis refused to yield, more blood would be shed before this was settled. Yet, as Renly turned to her with that warm smile, she forced herself to mirror it. The crowd of lords and ladies knelt, chanting, "Long life King Renly." The words echoed in the high vaults of the throne room. Cersei felt an almost dizzying rush. She was now the wife of a king. Would they call her queen, or would the faith question the legality of the succession? She did not care at that moment. Her father's teachings rung in her mind, power is power. Seize it and the world will call it justice. Renly reached out a hand and she took it. The two of them stood before the kneeling throng, their eyes meeting in a shared acknowledgement of how far they had come from those awkward teenagers betrothed in a court overshadowed by the Mad King. Now they were the rulers, or so they hoped. Queen Cersei, someone called from the crowd, and a chorus of agreement followed. That night, feasting broke out across the city. The small folk, relieved to avoid a sack, welcomed the new king in whatever joyous fashion they could muster. Knights and lords reveled in the Red Keep. Cersei circulated among them, graciously accepting congratulatory remarks. She was careful to send a portion of the feast's bounty to the slums of Flea Bottom, just enough to keep the people content and less likely to riot. This was a lesson from her father: when the small folk with just enough gestures of goodwill that they do not become a problem. Amid the celebration, however, came ill tidings. Scouts reported sightings of Stannis's fleet setting sail from Dragonstone. He was accompanied by a red priestess rumored to command shadows and flames. They were heading for the Blackwater Bay. War would arrive on King Renly's doorstep far sooner than anyone had hoped. When the tidings reached him, Renly set aside his goblet of wine. His brow furrowed in worry. The drums of war had not faded with his peaceful entry to King's Landing, they merely echoed louder in the distance. Cersei gathered with Renly and his trusted commanders in the Royal Solar. Mace Tyrell, Randall Tarly, Loras Tyrell, and others formed a circle around a map spread across a table. Little figurines represented the ships that might soon fill the bay. "Stannis knows our forces are here," Tarly said. "If he can land his army and lure us out from behind these walls, he may believe he can turn the city against us." Mace Tyrell scoffed. "The city is ours. The small folk have no love for Stannis. Not after they've seen the prosperity we can bring." Ser Loras Tyrell, eager for glory, added, "Let him come. I'll ride out and scatter his forces. He's but a stiff-backed pretender." Renly listened with a grave expression. Cersei observed him, noticing the subtle shift in his manner. He was wearing the mantle of kingship now, not the carefree younger brother. "We can't underestimate Stannis," Renly warned. "He is known for his stubbornness and his knowledge of warfare. And if these rumors of black magic are true, we must be doubly cautious." Cersei cleared her throat. "We have the advantage of numbers and the city's defenses. If we fortify the bay, man the walls with archers and scorpions, we might repel his fleet. He lacks the men to conduct a proper siege unless he's made alliances we're unaware of." She thought of the Lannister host under Tywin. They had not yet declared for Renly, but in truth they were unlikely to side with Stannis. If her father must choose, better that he choose the Baratheon with Lannister connections than the one who threatened Lannister interests. She kept that thought private for now, not wanting to show dependence on Tywin's next move. Thus, the plan was formed. Renly's new hand, Ser Barristan Selmy, who had surprisingly agreed to serve, would organize the city's defenses. Mace Tyrell would command the field forces outside the gates, while Loras scouted the approach routes. The next days were a flurry of preparation, forging extra weapons, reinforcing the walls, positioning wildfire caches around the bay if necessary. Cersei oversaw much of the logistics, ensuring the gold cloaks remained loyal by granting small privileges and pay raises. All the while, they waited for the ominous sight of Stannis's sails on the horizon. When the day came, it came with a deep fog rolling over the Blackwater. From the battlements, Cersei and Renly watched as shadows emerged from the mist, the dark outlines of ships bearing the fiery heart sigil. Drums boomed across the water, and the tension in the city snapped taut. Archers knocked arrows, siege engines groaned into position, and the defenders prepared. Stannis's flagship moved forward, flanked by smaller escorts. A standard-bearer unfurled a banner that showed the crowned stag of Baratheon in flames, an unsettling sight to many who were used to the normal stag. A lesser man might have tried to parley, but Stannis did not. Instead, his fleet began a slow advance. Cersei felt her palms clammy. She had wanted to be at Renly's side, but the king insisted she remain within the Red Keep for her safety. So she stood on a high balcony, flanked by guards, watching as the first siege engines on the city's walls hurled flaming barrels of pitch. They arced through the sky and crashed upon Stannis's ships. Some erupted into flame, illuminating the gloom. From her vantage, she saw men screaming on deck, the ocean turning into a swirl of smoke and fire. But Stannis's fleet kept coming. At the Mudgate, Mace Tyrell's forces engaged smaller landing parties. The clang of steel rose from the wharves. Flames licked at the air. Men died, their cries echoing across the water. The defenders had numbers, yet Stannis's men fought with a fanatic zeal, spurred on by the Red Priestess who stood at the prow of one of the ships, arms raised as if calling upon her fiery god. Then came a moment that haunted Cersei's memories long after. A shadowy shape, half seen through the billowing smoke, skittered across the surface of the bay as if it were a living darkness. Archers on the walls cried out in terror, arrows whizzing harmlessly through the specter. It slid toward the lines of defenders, and where it passed, men fell clutching their throats, black lines creeping across their skin as though strangled by invisible hands. Cersei's breath caught. She had never believed in magic or gods, but that horror shook her to the core. Yet, the living could fight back. Mace Tyrell, seeing his men falter, ordered a charge. Knights in gleaming armor thundered across the docks, cutting through any foothold Stannis' men had seized. On the walls, scorpions and ballistae hurled spears at the ships. Renly himself, ignoring his council's advice, rode out with the reserve cavalry. Cersei's heart pounded as she watched him vanish into the chaos. She pressed her lips to keep from crying out. The thunder of hooves, the roar of flames, the screech of men in battle merged into one monstrous din. When the sun finally broke the fog in the late afternoon, the bay was choked with wreckage. Stannis' flagship still floated, but battered and listing. Fires raged on the water's surface, fed by pitch and wildfire. Bodies bobbed among the debris. The stench of burning wood and flesh drifted up to the ramparts. Cersei's stomach turned. Yet she scanned the fray for any sign of Renly's standard, the crowned stag against a field of gold. At last, she glimpsed it near the mud gate, surrounded by knights still pressing forward. They had forced Stannis' men to retreat to their ships or risk being cut down. By dusk, the remnants of Stannis' fleet were pulling back, limping into the open sea. King Renly Baratheon held King's Landing, bloodied but victorious. The Red Keep erupted in cheers. The city's bells rang triumphantly. Cersei rushed down from her high vantage, ignoring the soot-streaked corridors, pushing past guards to find her husband. She found him near the gates, armor-dented and splattered with gore, sweat-soaked hair clinging to his forehead. He was breathing heavily but alive, though a few men around him lay moaning in pain. When he saw her, he gave a weary smile. She threw her arms around him, not caring who watched. Her voice trembled with relief. "You live," she whispered, pressing her cheek to the cold metal of his breastplate. Renly nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He was shaking with adrenaline, exhaustion, and the raw reality of battle. Stannis, he had some devilry on his side. But we held. I couldn't let him take our city. In that moment, Cersei felt a surge of fierce pride. She helped him remove his helm, smoothing his damp hair. The men around them gave hushed murmurs of respect for their king and queen. Loras Tyrell stepped forward, battered but victorious, to kneel before Renly with his sword across his palms, offering it as a sign of fealty. Around them, the battered defenders echoed, "Long live King Renly. Long live Queen Cersei." A part of Cersei wanted to scream with triumph. They had done it. They had repelled Stannis' assault, secured the throne, and shown the realm that Renly was no mere pretender. This was the moment she had dreamed of for so long, power firmly in her grasp. She thought of Tywin's letter, "Do not lose." She had not. She had won, with Renly at her side. Their children would stand as the rightful heirs to the throne. Of course, the war was not truly over. Stannis retreated to Dragonstone, licking his wounds, and some lords in the realm might still hesitate to bend the knee. The Targaryen exiles still lurked across the sea. But for now, King's Landing belonged to Renly. The small folk cheered him, the lords flocked to his court, and the city banners bore the crowned stag. At every feast, songs were sung of the glorious victory over the would-be usurper. And in those songs, the queen's name was praised as well, for she had helped guide the realm through the crisis. When the next dawn arrived, the city awoke to hope. Repairs to the walls began, the wounded were tended. A royal decree proclaimed that those who had fought bravely would be rewarded. Cersei took personal charge of distributing coin to the families of fallen soldiers, carefully burnishing Renly's reputation as a compassionate king. She saw to it that word spread of how different he was from the drunken huntsman Robert had become, how he would guide the realm with a gentle hand but also a righteous sword. Within weeks, lords from the Crownlands and the Stormlands arrived to bend the knee, praising his wise rule, hoping for a place in the new order. Through it all, Cersei remained a constant presence at Renly's side. She joined him at small council meetings where they wrestled with the realm's logistics, the depletion of the crown's treasury, and the need to establish strong ties with the Westerlands to keep Tywin content. She offered her thoughts on who should be named Warden of the North in the absence of a direct Stark heir, forging alliances with the Riverlands to secure support. She found herself stepping into the role of queen more confidently each day, issuing orders that were heeded, shaping the court's policies. When she walked the halls, courtiers bowed deeply, stepping aside. She could feel their fear and admiration, a heady mixture that fed her sense of purpose. Renly, for his part, seemed content to share the burden of rule with her. He had always been affable, more interested in winning hearts than dominating with intimidation. Cersei complimented him with her sharp mind and her father's lessons. They became a pair that the realm watched with fascination. The charismatic king and the cunning queen, each balancing the other's shortcomings. And so the days turned to weeks, then months. Their children, Eamon and Joanna, were brought to King's Landing and presented to the court in a lavish ceremony. The crowd cooed over the dark-haired prince and the golden-haired princess who tottered forward in their tiny finery. Renly lifted them up, proclaiming them the future of the Baratheon dynasty. The small folk cheered, seeing in them a promise of stability. Cersei stood beside Renly, luminous in green velvet trimmed with golden lions, a statement that House Lannister was still part of the foundation upon which this new monarchy was built. Late at night, in the privacy of their bedchamber, Renly and Cersei would sometimes whisper about the future. They spoke of ensuring Stannis could not rise again, of dealing with potential threats like the exiled Targaryens or the Iron Islands. They spoke of forging new roads, new trade agreements, maybe even a grand building project to leave a legacy more lasting than war. Often, Renly's voice would drift toward optimism, talking of all the good they might do. Cersei, more guarded, would remind him of the persistent dangers. Yet, she allowed herself a small measure of hope that they could rule better than Robert had. Every so often, she would recall the moment she was told that she would not marry Robert Baratheon, but Renly instead. At the time, she had not known what fate held in store. Now she gazed at her husband, the king, and thought that perhaps this union was indeed the key that unlocked her ambitions. She did not love him with the burning fervor of a maiden's first infatuation. Love had always been an elusive concept for Cersei, overshadowed by her thirst for power and respect. But she had a kind of fondness for him, a closeness built on shared struggles and triumphs, and that was more than many lords and ladies ever had in their marriages. As the realm took its first steps into Renly's reign, Cersei moved forward with carefully measured confidence. She had plans for the kingdom, for her family, for herself. She would ensure her children's futures were secure, that the Lannister name remained among the highest pillars of power, and that Renly would remain strong enough to hold the Iron Throne against any who dared challenge him. Whatever storms brewed beyond the horizon, Stannis' unresolved threat, the Targaryen heirs across the sea, the cunning plots of those who lurked at court, Cersei would face them with the fearless tenacity of a lioness. And so it was that the Seven Kingdoms came to be ruled by the youngest Baratheon brother with a Lannister queen at his side. The gold of the Rock and the loyal swords of the Reach kept the capital secure, and the small folk, for the moment, could breathe a sigh of relief. A new era had dawned on the Iron Throne, one shaped by the unlikely partnership of Renly and Cersei, each driven by their own ambitions, bound together by the promise of power. In the hush of night, when even the Red Keep's shadows were at rest, Cersei would lie awake sometimes, listening to Renly's soft breathing. She would recall the illusions she had once spun in her girlhood, dreaming of marrying a king, of wearing a crown, of commanding the respect and fear of the court. Now she had all of that and more. Her father's words echoed one last time in her mind, "A lion does not concern itself with the opinions of sheep," and she would close her eyes, exhaling her contentment into the darkness. The realm might tremble still, storms might rise anew, but she would face them as she always had, with unbowed will and cunning. For she was Queen Cersei Baratheon, once a Lannister maiden, now a monarch's partner in rule. And she would let no one wrest that power from her grasp. Cersei felt the weight of her new crown more keenly with each passing day. The celebrations that followed Renly's triumph at the Blackwater had begun to settle into memory, replaced by the practical demands of governing a realm still scarred by the aftermath of Robert's death and the Baratheon brothers' clash. Yet the realm needed leadership, needed peace, and, above all, needed the illusion of stability Renly's victory had offered. Cersei understood that illusions were often as good as truths, provided one wielded them skillfully and ruthlessly enough. Such was the nature of power, as her father had always taught her. She stood on a balcony overlooking the Red Keep's courtyard. Below her, a company of gold cloaks marched in orderly formation, their spears glinting in the morning sun. The bustle of King's Landing reached her ears, hawkers peddling wares, the hum of fisherfolk returning from the Blackwater rush, the clank of wagons carting flour to the city's granaries. Once she might have gazed upon all this with the eyes of someone who felt half a stranger here, but no longer. She was queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and that sense of belonging, of rightful dominion, settled into her bones more deeply with every step she took through the castle's corridors. Renly had departed days ago with an escort to bring order to the Stormlands, visiting lords who had been slow to bend the knee or who felt uncertain about the shift of power. Though the victory at the Blackwater had been decisive, not all the Storm Lords had joined in time. Some were half-ruined by Stannis' attempts to pry them away, and others simply chafed at the notion that the youngest Baratheon now wore the crown. In theory, these lords had no choice but to accept Renly's rule. In practice, it was wiser for him to appear in person, show them courtesy, and put their concerns to rest. So he rode the roads of his birthright while Cersei remained in King's Landing, holding court in his absence, guiding the small council through the tumult of daily governance. She did not mind ruling in solitude. It gave her the chance to prove herself, to exhibit the steel inside her that many courtiers, even after all these years, still underestimated. For all Renly's charm, there had always been an air of pleasantry about him, a readiness to be liked. Cersei possessed a different quality, one that her father had once named, the strength behind the eyes, that core of self-assuredness that allowed her to stand unbowed when lesser souls would bend. She heard footsteps behind her and glanced back to see Jaime striding onto the balcony. It was still strange for her to see him freed of his King Guard vows. He had resigned that white cloak not long after Robert's death. The new regime allowed certain changes, and Jaime had quietly stepped away, returning to the west to aid in Tywin's affairs for a time before re-emerging in King's Landing. The public explanation was that, with Robert gone and the realm under a new king, Jaime's lifetime vow might be renegotiated, especially since he had once pledged himself to protect House Targaryen's king and then Robert. A second kingslaying, in the name of loyalty or not, was an irony best left unspoken. It was more complicated than that, of course, but Jaime had never been a man to dwell on the niceties of how the world saw him. Staring at the ants again, he teased as he drew up beside her, golden hair bright in the sun. She slid him an impatient glance. The city is hardly an anthill, though I suppose from your vantage everything must appear trivial. She felt a twinge of warmth at his presence, familiar, comfortable, a reminder of a life before so many crowns and battles had rearranged the realm. But she kept her voice cool. Are you not on duty this morning? I thought you'd be out drilling men in the yard or riding at the head of some bright new company. Jaime shrugged, leaning casually against the balustrade. I've men enough to handle the drilling. Besides, your dear father's letters keep me occupied. He wants updates on the new king's doings, the city's stability, trade, war debt. He always wants more than I can give him in a single raven's worth. But at least he's content for the moment. You know how he is. Yes, Cersei knew. Tywin waited at Casterly Rock, observing everything with calculating eyes. He had not openly marched behind Renly, not until it was clear that Stannis would fail. Even now, Lannister men were quietly stationed in strategic spots from the Westerlands to the Crownlands, a spider's web of readiness that Tywin never bothered to disguise. If the day came that Renly faltered or the realm turned chaotic again, House Lannister would be poised to shape events. She could not quite resent her father for that. Cersei and Tywin were too much alike. They saw power for what it was, not for what it pretended to be. Has he written anything new about the Targaryens? Cersei asked. That name had become an undercurrent of every council meeting of late. Rumors placed Viserys Targaryen long dead, but his sister Daenerys lived across the narrow sea, forging alliances among free captains or perhaps even with the Dothraki horde. Whispered reports claimed the girl had dragons, living dragons, creatures reborn from ancient legend. Nobody could confirm the truth, but the mere rumor had left half the city trembling. If real, such beasts could devour armies, cast shadows of fire across entire fields. Yet for all the fear and speculation, no Targaryen navy had appeared off the coast, no armies had marched from the east. Jaime nodded. He wants more news on them, of course. He wonders if the king has any intention of sending envoys to Essos, maybe to bribe or assassinate. And he complains that you and Renly have been too gentle with Varys. Father doesn't trust a man who whispers half-truths in every ear. Cersei gave a short laugh. Too gentle, is that it? If we rid ourselves of Varys, we lose his network of little birds. Though I suspect father would prefer his own spies running the city. Jaime shrugged again. No doubt. But I suppose you know best. You always do, sister. There was an unspoken tension in his use of that word. Once upon a time, they had shared secrets far deeper than mere sibling kinship. But their lives had diverged. Cersei did not regret it. Ambition and necessity were the guiding stars of her life, and she had secured her path by marrying Renly, forging alliances, bearing children with a claim to the throne. Love, or lust, or whatever foolish dream she might have once entertained with Jaime belonged to another world. She studied his face for a moment, took in the half-sardonic tilt of his lips. He would never speak of the past openly, not anymore. Good, she thought. Let it remain behind us. She turned from the balcony to head inside. Walk with me, she said. We might as well pretend to enjoy each other's company. I'm expected at the hall within the hour. People love a queen who hears their petitions now and then. Jaime smiled, falling into step at her side. She led him down the corridor, through a patch of bright morning light slanting in from the high windows. Guards snapped to attention as she passed, bowing stiffly. There had been a time when these corridors had felt as though they belonged to King Aerys, or to Robert after the rebellion. Now, with the banners changed, with the crowned stag in gold draped over every tapestry, King's Landing felt like her domain. The notion filled her with a subtle pleasure she no longer bothered to hide. They found the great hall abustle with the usual mix of petitioners and courtiers. The Iron Throne loomed at one end, a stark silhouette of swords hammered and twisted together, but Cersei did not mount it. Instead, she took a seat on a carved wooden chair placed on the raised dais. She rarely deigned to sit the Iron Throne herself. Renly was the king, and she had no need to give the more superstitious courtiers a reason to whisper about her overstepping. Even so, no one mistook who held the real power in that moment. Men kept their voices respectful, their eyes lowered. She felt Jaime standing at her right, letting his golden presence intimidate any who might test the queen's patience. One by one, the petitioners approached, guided by the master of laws and the gold cloaks. A merchant complained about tariffs on trade ships from Dorne. A knight sought justice for a stolen horse. A fisherman's wife begged for an audience to recoup losses from a pirate raid near Cracklaw Point. Cersei listened, nodding, occasionally giving a soft word, occasionally flicking her gaze to the scribe who recorded everything. She dispensed coin from the royal coffers in a few cases, commanded an investigation in others. It was a performance as much as it was governance. Each order she gave was a nudge to shape public perception. The queen is magnanimous, the queen protects King's Landing. Near midday, a hush rippled through the hall. The next petitioner was Lord Mathis Rowan of Goldengrove, come to speak on a matter that had begun to trouble the court, the Reach's unrest. Despite the Tyrells having firmly supported Renly, not all their bannermen were pleased with the extended war levies demanded of them. Stannis's retreat to Dragonstone did not mean the end of tension. Some of the lesser lords chafed at taxes or newly enforced conscription. Rowan, a steady man with a certain dignity, knelt before Cersei with a respectful bow. "My queen," he began, "I bring tidings from the marches near the Mander. There have been disruptions. Groups of armed men claiming loyalty to no lord, stirring dissent, raiding villages. My liege lord, Mace Tyrell, has sent men to quell them, but they vanish into the forests or merge with the peasantry. It grows worse by the week, and rumor says they might be men still loyal to the notion that Stannis should have the crown, or perhaps to the Targaryens." Cersei regarded him carefully. "They carry no banners? No sigils? None that we've seen," Rowan said. "Some of them speak openly of wanting a different king, but we cannot say which. Others claim they fight for their own cause. Perhaps outlaws, bandits, or broken men who have lost everything in these past few years of turmoil." She tapped a finger on the arm of her chair. "The realm grows weary of war. They will use any excuse to be rid of new taxes, new levies. But the crown cannot simply let disorder fester." Her gaze swept the onlookers, letting them feel the gravity of the situation. "Lord Rowan, you have my authority to coordinate with Lord Tyrell. Raise as many men as you need from among your sworn bannermen. If these outlaws will not submit, then they must be brought to heel for the sake of peace. How soon can you march?" Rowan's expression eased slightly, as though relieved. "If I depart by week's end, we can reach the troubled areas swiftly, my queen. But He paused, choosing his words diplomatically. "I hope the crown can also send a few men, 100 or so, to show the people that this is not only the Reach's burden. A sign that King Renly stands with us." Cersei frowned inwardly. She did not relish thinning the city's forces. Even with Stannis pushed back, she preferred to keep the garrison strong. But she also knew what it would look like if the crown turned a deaf ear to the region that had provided Renly with so many swords. Alienating the Reach could be disastrous. "Very well," she answered. "I shall dispatch a contingent. You shall have 100 men under a trusted commander." Rowan bowed again, gratitude etched across his face. "You are most gracious, my queen." She flicked her hand. "Raise your heads. Now go, and restore peace to the Mander. Remind these outlaws that the realm is united under one crown." When Rowan withdrew, Cersei could almost feel the ripple of approval in the hall. A deft move, giving just enough support to keep the Tyrell bannermen feeling valued, but not so much that she weakened the capital's defenses. She kept her features composed, acknowledging the next petitioner with a serene nod, yet inwardly she felt the burn of satisfaction. Each small act of rule was a step in consolidating her power, forging a bond between her presence as queen and the realm's stability. The day's proceedings stretched on. By late afternoon, she had grown weary of the supplicants, though she hid it behind an unyielding poise. Finally, she signaled for the small council to conclude the public session, and the hall was cleared. Guards ushered out the last cluster of petitioners, shutting the heavy doors behind them. The hush that descended brought instant relief to Cersei, and she exhaled softly, aware of the tension knotting her neck and shoulders. Jaime approached with a faint grin. "Well done, sister. You almost looked like you were enjoying their lamentations." "Only a fool enjoys the tedious moans of peasants," she replied, rubbing her temples. "But at least it allowed me to see which lords are still waffling. I noted you were taking mental notes the entire time." "Of course," Jaime said. "I'm not as thick as some believe. Now, if you've no more decrees to issue, I might snatch a flagon of wine from the kitchens. Care to join me?" She glanced at the sun's angle through the high windows. It was creeping toward evening. "I have a small council meeting to attend. You know how it is, the business never ends." "Ah, yes. Such a pity you have to mingle with the likes of Peter Baelish and Varys. I almost feel sorry for you." Cersei allowed a wry smile. "You could join the council yourself if you fancy politics. Or is that too dull for the Kingslayer?" He snorted. "I'll leave that to you. Command me to cut someone down on the battlefield and I'd be happy to oblige, but don't make me endure the scheming in that council chamber." She shook her head, leaving him to his amusements, and made her way toward the council chamber. Along the corridors, she noticed the hush of courtiers stepping aside. Some cast her guarded looks. She did not blame them. The memory of the war between Renly and Stannis still trembled in every corner. The realm was stable for now, but stability is seldom permanent. Inside, she found only a few members seated: Grand Maester Pycelle, who nodded politely, and Varys, who rose with a sweep of his lavender-scented robes. Peter Baelish was conspicuously absent, though Cersei half expected him to waltz in at the last minute with some thin smile on his lips. Also present was Ser Barristan Selmy, Renly's Hand of the King, a role he had only recently accepted. For so many years, Barristan had served as Lord Commander of the King's Guard, the honorable knight whose loyalty to Robert never wavered. But after Robert's death and the swirl of events that followed, he had chosen to remain at court to advise Renly. Some said it was an uneasy arrangement, but no one doubted Barristan's sense of duty. "Your Grace," Varys said in his silken voice, bowing slightly. "Might I say you look resplendent after such a productive day?" Cersei inclined her head, ignoring the pleasantry. "Where's Baelish? He's as slippery as an eel, but he should know better than to keep us waiting." Pycelle cleared his throat. "He mentioned something about a meeting with the Iron Bank's emissary. Perhaps," Varys purred, "or perhaps he's making new alliances behind our backs. Lord Baelish does have a talent for quietly collecting debts, both financial and personal." Barristan's mouth tightened at the corners. He was never one for subtle intrigue. "Let us not forget we have pressing matters to discuss. The question of the Iron Islands, for instance. Balon Greyjoy's envoys have been sighted in the Riverlands. They may be testing the realm's readiness to repel another rebellion." Cersei's gaze sharpened. The Ironborn had a knack for choosing moments of perceived weakness to strike. "What do we know of these envoys?" Varys folded his hands. "Merely that they've been spotted near Seaguard. No official word of any treaties, but it's likely they're seeking cracks in our alliances. If Balon Greyjoy believes King Renly's hold is not absolute, he may make another attempt at independence." "The Greyjoy fool tried that once against Robert and failed," Cersei said flatly. "If he tries again, we'll burn Pike to the ground." Pycelle fidgeted with his chain of office, a series of linked medallions representing the maester's knowledge. "War on the Iron Islands is no small endeavor, my queen. Their coasts are treacherous, their longships swift. We would do well to remain vigilant but not provoke them if we can avoid it." She set her jaw. "Strength deters the Ironborn more than negotiation. When King Renly returns, we'll weigh our options. Until then, let our fleets stand ready, and let them see we are not so diminished that we can't guard our own shores." Barristan nodded. "As you say, Your Grace. I'll see that the City Watch intensifies its patrols along the docks." We can also send word to Tarth to watch for any unusual movement of longships. The conversation moved on to finances, the crown's indebtedness after so many feasts, tournaments, and war levies. Pycelle looked fretful, muttering about the Iron Bank's patience wearing thin. Varys offered the observation that Tywin Lannister might extend a new line of credit, though with certain terms attached. Cersei bristled at the idea of being indebted to her father any more than necessary. But she also recognized that the crown's coffers were not limitless. A queen had to weigh every cost carefully. Eventually, Peter Baelish strolled in, trailing the faint scent of minted soap. He apologized for his tardiness with a half-smile that dripped insincerity, then promptly offered a suggestion about raising coin by adjusting port taxes in Old Town. Cersei listened, aware that Baelish always offered solutions that somehow expanded his own network of influence. He was a vulture disguised as a courtier, but at times his cunning made him useful. The meeting dragged until dusk, and by the end, Cersei's head pulsed with the start of a headache. She dismissed them all, leaving Gysere Barristan to finalize a few matters of deployment and supply. Pycelle tottered off to his chambers. Varys disappeared into the corridors as he often did, leaving behind only a trace of perfume. Baelish lingered for a moment, exchanging a polite nod with Cersei, then bowed and left as well. When the chamber was empty, she sank into a seat and let out a soft, weary sigh. Her mind churned with details: rebellious outlaws in the Reach, possible Greyjoy marauding, the crown's debts, and in the background, the persistent rumor of Targaryen dragons. Even with the realm nominally united, 1,000 cracks threatened to splinter the peace. She reminded herself of her father's creed: a single strong will can hold the realm together if it knows how to strike fear and command respect. Renly had the love of many; she would supply the fear when necessary. She rose, rubbed her eyes, and made her way toward the royal apartments. There, in chambers appointed for her personal comfort, she found a small meal waiting: a roasted hen with herbs, fresh bread, a flagon of dark Dornish wine. She ate quietly, half her thoughts still on the day's politics, then dismissed her serving women. She needed the solitude. In the flickering candlelight, she stood before a mirror of polished bronze, unfastening her embroidered gown. The reflection revealed a woman still in her prime, slender, golden-haired, her green eyes as sharp as any blade. Sometimes she wondered if she had grown too cold, if ambition had chiseled away any softness she once possessed. But no, she could still feel things keenly: the worry for her children, the fierce desire to see them secure, the pride in how far she had come from being a mere pawn in her father's designs. She closed her eyes, recalling Aemon's earnest face when he ran to greet her that morning, asking if he could ride the white pony in the mews. Joanna, her daughter, was too young yet to understand the burdens of rule, but she had begun toddling around the palace with wide golden eyes. Cersei wanted to keep them safe, far from the turmoil that threatened to boil over at any moment. She changed into a simple robe and moved to the window that overlooked Blackwater Bay. In the moonlight, the water shimmered silver, the ghosts of war lingering beneath its surface. She could still picture the day Stannis' ships had sailed in, the roar of battle, the flash of wildfire. Sometimes she woke from dreams of that black smoke, laced with screams. Power always came at a price. But she was willing to pay it if that meant her family held the throne. A knock sounded at the door. Frowning, she slipped on a velvet robe. "Enter," she called. The door opened to reveal a short steward, face blotchy with exertion. "Pardon me, my queen, but a raven's arrived from Storm's End. Urgent news." He held out a sealed parchment. She took it, noticing the Baratheon sigil pressed in golden wax. Renly's own seal. Her heart quickened. She thanked the steward and dismissed him, then cracked the seal and unrolled the parchment. Renly's handwriting met her eyes, hastily penned. "My beloved queen, I write in haste. My efforts in the Stormlands have borne some fruit. The lords are bending the knee, albeit slower than I'd hoped. Yet there is cause for concern. Reports reach me that Stannis has begun gathering men once more. Some say he's forging alliances with certain pirate fleets from the Stepstones or even the Sellsword companies of Essos. The Red Priestess travels with him still, filling his followers with fervor. I know not how large his force is, but we cannot be complacent. I shall finalize matters here, then return to King's Landing as swiftly as possible. We must prepare for the possibility that Stannis will strike again. Trust in the gods and in our own might. Renly." Cersei felt the hairs on her neck rise. So, Stannis was not content to lick his wounds on Dragonstone. He was scouring for new supporters, new sources of coin and ships. Perhaps he thought to slip past the newly fortified city walls. Or perhaps he sought to lure them out into the field. The last time Stannis had failed, but that did not mean the next time would be the same. She remembered the horror of that shadow on the waters, the men who died without a wound to show for it. The notion of dark sorcery made her skin crawl, for she had never believed in spells or gods. Yet she could not deny what she had seen. If Stannis had truly embraced unnatural forces, how far would he go? She read the letter twice more, then tossed it onto a small table. She would not let fear control her. If Stannis wanted war, then war he would have. Renly would be here soon, and together they would stand. There was also the question of Lannister support. Tywin would not let the Iron Throne slip away if he sensed a serious threat. He might withhold open commitment until the decisive moment, but he would never allow a defeat of House Baratheon Lannister. A smaller question gnawed at her mind. What if Stannis, in his desperate search for allies, turned to Daenerys Targaryen? The Targaryens once had a vast network of loyalists and exiles scattered across Essos. If the Red Priestess had introduced Stannis to foreign Sellsword captains or wealthy magisters, it might not be far-fetched to imagine a secret pact. But that was speculation. If dragons truly lived, might Stannis try to harness them for his own ends? The idea seemed mad. She forced herself to remain calm, remembering how Renly's words sounded when he declared he would not lose. He had the Tyrells, the Stormlands, the Crownlands. He had her father's gold behind him, albeit guardedly. He had the city's admiration. Stannis had stubbornness and a handful of fanatics. Still, fanaticism could be a powerful weapon if wielded properly. A breeze rustled the parchment on the table, drawing her gaze. She snatched it up once more, read it a final time, then set it aside. She would share the contents with Barristan and the small council come morning. Let them see that King Renly remained vigilant, that the throne would not be taken unawares. Her eyes flicked again to the window, to the moonlit expanse of the bay. The realm seemed so tranquil by night, an illusion, she knew. War was an old wolf slinking outside the walls, waiting to sink its teeth in once more. She closed the shutters against the night, then retired to bed. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind wandered to her children, to the uncertain future. She pictured Aemon grown, a strong young man wearing golden armor with the stag and lion sigil proudly displayed. She pictured Joanna as a poised young lady who might one day marry into another great house, solidifying alliances that would keep the throne safe. These were the dreams that sustained her, that made every risk worthwhile. Finally, exhaustion took her, and she slipped into a restless slumber where visions of flaming hearts and shadowy silhouettes collided with the roar of 1,000 voices chanting her name. When dawn arrived, she dressed in a deep blue gown embroidered with gold thread in swirling lion shapes, a statement of her heritage, worn openly for all to see. Then she met the small council again, ignoring Baelish's smirk and Varys's smooth greeting. She read aloud the letter from Renly, each mention of Stannis's potential alliances weighting the air. Barristan's brow furrowed. Pycelle trembled, muttering about the need for negotiations. Baelish and Varys exchanged loaded looks. Stannis will come again, Barristan said gravely. We must be ready, your grace. The last time, he nearly took the city by surprise if not for the defenders' swift response. He'll not surprise us this time, she said coldly. We shall see to that. Mobilize the city watch. Increase the night patrols along the bay. We'll double-check the loyalty of every captain. And as for any rumors of these foreign alliances, I expect to know the moment a single Sellsword sets foot on Westerosi shores. She fixed Varys with a pointed stare. Do I make myself clear? Varys dipped his head, blinking languidly. Of course, my queen. My little birds will sing the moment anything stirs. Baelish, leaning against the edge of the table, tapped his chin. We might also consider a preemptive strike if the king agrees. If Stannis is gathering men on Dragonstone, perhaps a swift naval assault might catch him before he's prepared. Cersei considered it. A bold move. Risky, yes, because an attack at sea could leave King's Landing temporarily exposed if something went awry. But it might also stop Stannis from amassing strength. We'll see what King Renly advises when he returns. For now, gather intelligence on the composition of Stannis's forces. We don't strike blindly. So the days turned with the city bracing itself for the next threat. The memory of the Blackwater victory remained fresh enough that morale did not collapse, but beneath the surface, tension brewed. Taverns buzzed with speculation about the Red Priestess, about the king on Dragonstone who claimed righteous fury. Some drunken tongues spoke of a Targaryen princess across the sea with dragons at her back. Others insisted that the Greyjoys or the Dornish or the North would rise up next. Cersei monitored it all through her watchers, carefully stamping out the worst of the rumors with arrests or quiet threats. She re-emphasized that the king had triumphed once and would do so again. She made sure bread prices in the city remained stable, that the port traffic continued. Small gestures, but collectively they kept the common folk from panic. Meanwhile, the tension between the Tyrells and certain other houses in the Reach took a more violent turn. More reports of banditry arrived, this time with direct references to Stannis's cause or to anyone who would oust the false king. Margaery Tyrell, who resided in King's Landing in her own splendid apartments, came to see Cersei with worried eyes. "My lady," Margaery said one afternoon, bowing, "I've just received letters from my father. He says these rogue bands grow bolder by the day, ambushing supply carts bound for Highgarden. My father pleads for more men, more coin, and above all, a show of royal authority to quell these pockets of discontent." Cersei's smile was practiced. "Lady Margaery, your father knows the realm's resources must be spread wisely. We cannot strip the capital of its defenders. But rest assured, we will not abandon the Reach. Lord Rowan and other loyal bannermen are on the march. The crown fully supports them." Margaery's face was demure, but her gaze had a flicker of steel. "Thank you, my queen. I only wish for my family to remain safe. My lord father has done so much for the king, after all." Yes, and he expects repayment, Cersei thought. Mace Tyrell had risked much to back Renly, expecting a Tyrell queen in return. Instead, he had found himself overshadowed by the existing union with Cersei Lannister. Ever since, Mace had flung hints of dissatisfaction in subtle ways, trying to ensure the Tyrells reaped more power from their investment. Cersei would not let them overshadow her or Renly, but she understood the tightrope she walked. The Tyrells commanded an immense army and the fertile bounty of the Reach. It would be foolish to antagonize them too openly. When Margaery withdrew, Cersei paced her solar, wondering how best to balance these competing demands. The realm needed the Tyrells, and the Tyrells needed to feel valued, yet not indispensable. She toyed with the notion of forging some betrothal for Joanna or Aemon into a Tyrell branch, but the children were still young. A new marriage alliance might quell Mace's ambitions for the moment, but it might also give him too much sway over the royal line. She resolved to consult Renly on the matter once he returned. As the weeks passed, the city grew restless. Word arrived that Stannis had indeed hired several pirate crews from the Stepstones, commanded by a rogue captain known as Salladhor Saan. The watchers in the bay reported an uptick in suspicious vessels lurking beyond the horizon. Cersei ordered the royal fleet to remain on constant alert. Meanwhile, rumors from across the sea spoke of a certain Daenerys Targaryen in Slaver's Bay, leading an army of freed slaves, possibly with real dragons at her side. While no imminent threat, the rumor alone cast a long shadow. Finally, after 2 full moons, King Renly returned to the city in a swirl of banners and mounted knights. Cersei stood on the Red Keep's steps to greet him, their children at her side. Aemon, big-eyed, was excited to see his father. Joanna clutched her mother's hand, more timid. Renly dismounted gracefully, smiling in that charming way the city remembered. The crowd gathered in the yard cheered for the victorious, youthful king. Cersei allowed him the moment, stepping back to let him bask in the adulation. She saw the relief in his eyes when he finally reached them, as if returning to a safe harbor after rough seas. He knelt to hug Aemon, lifted Joanna for a kiss on her cheek, then turned to Cersei. She offered her hand, which he took gently, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "My queen," he said, voice warm. "I've missed you." She allowed a smile. "King's Landing has missed you, my lord. There is much to discuss." They dined privately that evening, just the two of them, an indulgence they rarely allowed themselves amid the demands of court. Renly recounted his travels through the Stormlands. He had visited Tarth, Haystack Hall, Crow's Nest, and Summerhall's ruins. Most lords had accepted him, albeit some with grudges left from Robert or Stannis. No open rebellions had surfaced, but discontent lingered in pockets. "And now we face a greater threat," Renly said between bites of roast lamb. He set his goblet down. "Stannis grows bolder. I don't know how many men he's mustered, but I suspect not enough to face us in open field. That means he'll rely on cunning or black magic." He grimaced. "That red woman he keeps is no ordinary mystic." Cersei took a small sip of wine, swirling it thoughtfully. "I'll not pretend to understand sorcery, but we can prepare for conventional war. He has pirates and a few lords who hate us. We have the city walls, the royal fleet, and the Tyrell alliance. Let him come." Renly nodded, though a shadow passed over his expression. "We must make sure the Tyrells stay committed fully. Mace Tyrell grows restless." He paused, choosing his words carefully. He expected a queen from Highgarden once upon a time. Cersei's lips thinned. "We've been through this. Our marriage was sealed before you took the throne. The Tyrells must accept it." "I know," he said quickly. "I only mean to say that if we can find a gesture that appeases him, we should." He mentioned the possibility of betrothing Aemon to one of his granddaughters, but Aemon is still a child of 7. I told him that was too far in the future to discuss seriously. But perhaps we can do something else to show the Tyrells our gratitude. She suppressed a flash of annoyance. I'll think of something. We can arrange a fresh trade agreement or some new titles. Mace Tyrell is easily flattered. If we name him Warden of the South formally, that might mollify him. Renly exhaled, relieved. Yes, a formal investiture might help. Very well. Let's do that and hold a grand feast to mark the event. The city could use a distraction from all the rumors of war. Cersei dabbed her mouth with a napkin, feeling the swirl of her own calculations. A lavish feast, more coin spent. But perhaps wise if it reassured the populace that the king stood unafraid. Agreed, she said at last. We'll let Mace Tyrell preen a bit, shower him with enough honors to keep him satisfied. He glanced at her with a hint of amusement. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. We give him a parade, a formal ceremony, and a parchment with a fancy seal proclaiming him Warden of the South. Then he can strut in Highgarden to his heart's content. Meanwhile, we keep the real power in our hands. Renly chuckled softly, the sound reminding her of the boy he once was. Very well. I bow to your wisdom, dear wife. They continued their meal, the conversation drifting to other matters, the children's lessons, the gossip about Littlefinger's maneuverings, the question of the Greyjoys. It felt almost domestic, as if they were just a noble couple discussing estate management. Only the occasional flicker of tension reminded them that they now ruled the Iron Throne, burdened with the knowledge that any misstep could spiral into chaos. After dinner, they strolled through the torchlit gardens, an evening breeze stirring the leaves. Cersei let herself relax slightly, listening to the sound of the fountains. Renly paused near a marble bench beneath a trellis of night-blooming flowers. Their perfume hung in the air, thick and sweet. He turned to her, his eyes searching her face. Sometimes I wish we could set aside all this weight, he murmured. But I know that's not how the world works. We've earned our place. And we must hold it. She studied him in the amber glow of the torches. He wore a simple doublet, the crowned stag embroidered in golden thread, yet there was a subtle shift in him. The boyish laughter had given way to something more pensive, more burdened. He had killed men at the Blackwater, watched his friends die, and faced the possibility of losing everything. Ambition had brought them this far, but ambition took its toll. And we will hold it, she said firmly, laying a hand on his arm. Stannis can scrounge up 1,000 pirate ships for all I care. We have the strength of the realm behind us. He leaned in, pressing a brief, warm kiss to her forehead. You're my anchor, Cersei. If I didn't have you by my side, I doubt I'd stand so firmly. A part of her softened at that. She was not a woman who pined for flowery declarations of love, but loyalty and respect were currency she valued. She returned the gesture, kissing his cheek. We rule together, she said simply. I'd have it no other way. They lingered there for a time, letting the hush of night envelop them until at last they returned to the castle's corridors. Dawn would bring fresh challenges, a new cycle of petitions and demands, but at least for this fleeting moment they shared an understanding of purpose. Cersei took comfort in that, for she knew how quickly alliances could crumble. In the ensuing weeks, the plan to appease Mace Tyrell took shape. Invitations went out across the realm, summoning lords and ladies to witness the king formally invest Tyrell with the title Warden of the South in a splendid ceremony. The city swelled with visiting dignitaries, from the smiling Lady Olenna Tyrell, who wasted no opportunity to offer pointed remarks about the capital's stench, to lesser knights arrayed in Reachman colors. Festivities were announced, a grand feast in the throne room, a small tourney in the city squares, a day of music and dancing. Cersei oversaw every detail, ensuring it projected the image of a confident monarchy. She had the red keep draped in bright banners depicting the crowned stag and the golden lion entwined, a subtle reminder that House Lannister stood equal in this arrangement. She assigned household knights to keep order in the streets, determined to avoid brawls or riots. Wine casks from the arbor, pastries from across the crownlands, roasted boar from the stormlands, everything was meticulously planned to dazzle the guests. On the appointed day, Renly, resplendent in black and gold finery, sat upon the Iron Throne. Mace Tyrell stood before him, beaming like a man who had just inherited all the gold in the Westerlands. Trumpeters sounded a fanfare, and Ser Barristan Arie. The royal decree proclaiming Mace Tyrell as Warden of the South. The hall erupted in applause. Cersei watched from the dais, her face wearing a polite smile. Next to her, Margaery Tyrell bowed her head, though her eyes flicked sideways to gauge Cersei's reaction. Lady Olenna, seated in a place of honor, merely gave a small huff, as if acknowledging that the show was grand enough but not beyond her expectations. When Mace stepped up to kneel before the throne, Renly lifted a heavy golden cloak clasped with a rose sigil and draped it around the man's shoulders in symbolic gesture. Another cheer went up. "Rise, Lord Mace Tyrell," Renly intoned, voice clear. "Warden of the South, defender of the Reach, and ever my loyal subject. May the gods grant you wisdom and strength." Mace stood, his face flushed with triumph. "I serve at your pleasure, your grace. My sword and my halls are forever yours." Cersei doubted the sincerity of that last phrase, but the spectacle worked wonders. The lords in attendance applauded, some perhaps envying Mace's ascendancy. Mace had the moment he craved, the realm's recognition that the Tyrells sat at the king's right hand. That should keep him content for a time, Cersei mused, especially if they layered the ceremony with compliments and occasional illusions of further power. She had no intention of truly ceding any measure of the crown's authority, but illusions could be potent when skillfully deployed. The feast began shortly thereafter. Long tables groaned with platters of meats and fish, mountains of fruit, an endless supply of arbor gold and ale. Minstrels played lively tunes, jugglers passed among the guests, and the throng grew merrier with each passing hour. Renly took his place beside Cersei at the high table. Across from them sat Mace, Lady Olenna, and Margaery. The chatter of the hall rose, the clang of cups and plates creating a swirl of festivity. Cersei sipped her wine sparingly, preferring to keep her wits. She noticed how Margaery kept glancing at Renly. That old arrangement that Margaery might have been Renly's bride lingered in the corners of the conversation. The king, for his part, was affable as always, laughing at Mace's jokes, indulging in toasts. But Cersei sensed his caution too. They both knew how precarious these alliances could be if not nurtured carefully. Meanwhile, the smaller lords of the Reach tried to catch the king's eye, no doubt hoping for favor or new grants of land. Cersei made sure some of them received a kind word from her or from Renly. Let them walk away feeling that the crown remembered their service. In truth, she kept track of which lords were more valuable, which ones might be easily swayed by discontent. The memory of bandits claiming to fight for Stannis or the Targaryens had not faded. Partway through the feast, Baelish and Varys approached the high table with obsequious bows. Varys excused himself for interrupting the king's enjoyment, but announced that a group of envoys had arrived from the Westerlands, Lannister bannermen, seeking audience with the crown. More arrivals? Cersei asked, feeling a prickle of curiosity. She had expected some presents from the Westerlands, but not an urgent one. Varys nodded. They bear a message from your noble father, Lord Tywin. They claim it is most pressing, though they did not elaborate in the hearing of others. They await your convenience in the solar. Renly and Cersei exchanged a glance. Tywin always had impeccable timing, or perhaps he simply wished to remind everyone that House Lannister remained pivotal. Renly drained his wine cup, setting it aside. We can spare a few moments to speak with them, yes? Cersei stood. We should. My father rarely sends messages lightly. Together, they excused themselves from the table, leaving Mace Tyrell to preside over the feast in their absence. Margaery watched them depart, curiosity playing on her face. The eyes of many guests followed them as they slipped out of the hall. They found the Lannister envoys in a side solar, a small room with richly patterned rugs and a tall window overlooking the yard. 3 men bowed low upon Renly and Cersei's entrance. One, a tall and angular knight named Ser Kevin Hill, rumored to be a distant bastard branch of the Lannisters, stepped forward with a sealed scroll. He knelt. Your Grace, my lady. I come bearing words from Lord Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West. Cersei took the scroll. The seal of Casterly Rock was pressed into the wax, a golden lion. She broke it open and read swiftly, her eyes narrowing at the text. Well? Renly asked after a moment. Cersei handed it to him, her pulse quickening. My father has discovered a plot in the Westerlands, talk of Stannis' agents seeking to hire Sel's words to assault key strongholds. Or perhaps to sabotage gold mines, disrupt trade. More than that, there's rumor that some smaller houses in the western mountains might be ready to harbor Targaryen loyalists. Father believes that Stannis is not the only threat. Daenerys Targaryen, if she truly has an army in Essos, might have adherents across the sea funneling coin to sponsor infiltration. Renly read, his brow furrowing. He requests we reinforce certain garrisons near the Golden Road to prevent infiltration from the south or the river route. He also suggests the crown send a clear message to dissuade these Targaryen loyalists. Cersei breathed out. He wants a show of force. He wants to ensure no one in the West dares side with this rumored Targaryen invasion or Stannis' cause. Renly looked at her, concern mingling with determination. It appears war on multiple fronts is what they aim for: Stannis from the sea, the Targaryen threat from overseas, and internal unrest from outlaws. If Tywin is correct, we need to move swiftly. She nodded, adrenaline spiking. Let us be certain of the facts first. The last thing we need is to chase rumors and leave ourselves exposed. But yes, we cannot ignore my father's warnings. If Stannis or the Targaryens think to destabilize the Westerlands, they may do the same in the Reach or the North. Renly rolled up the parchment, handing it back to her. The North is another matter entirely. We've had little word from the remnants of House Stark beyond rumors that Ned Stark's eldest son has been named king in the North. Yet we've not truly felt that threat. For now, the North is too busy rebuilding after the Greyjoy raid years ago and the turmoil of the rebellion. Let's hope they stay quiet. Cersei dismissed the envoys with gracious thanks and promises to discuss this matter further. Once alone with Renly, she paced the solar, ignoring the tapestry of a roaring stag that covered one wall. Stannis grows bolder. Daenerys Targaryen, if she truly has dragons, could rally half the realm's malcontents. A war on two fronts. We need to unify the lords more tightly than ever. We can't afford more petty squabbles or half-hearted allegiances. Renly massaged the back of his neck. We'll call a war council. Include the Tyrells, the Storm Lords, and your father's representatives. We have to plan for the worst. That was how the next day found them in the council chamber again, ringed by stern-faced lords Mace Tyrell, Randyll Tarly, Mathis Rowan, Baelish, Varys, Barristan Selmy, and a cadre of lesser lords from the Stormlands and Crownlands. A single seat remained empty, reserved for Tywin Lannister if he chose to appear, though that was unlikely. He had sent Ser Kevin Hill to represent him. Renly laid out the contents of Tywin's letter, then looked to the lords. We must not panic, but we also cannot sit idle. If Stannis orchestrates sabotage in the Westerlands, it's only a matter of time before he tries similar tactics elsewhere. Coupled with the possibility that Daenerys Targaryen might land an army, we must be prepared. Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. The Reach is vast, but also well guarded. If Stannis' agents come, we'll root them out. The Targaryens once held sway in my lands, but not all hearts yearn for the return of that dynasty, certainly not when we have a king as generous as you, your grace. Randyll Tarly, more pragmatic, spoke next. Should the Targaryen attempt a landing, Slavers Bay is a long distance from Westeros. Our greatest threat in the immediate term remains Stannis. He has the knowledge of our coasts and that Red Priestess at his side. If the rumors of dark sorcery are true, he may attempt another unexpected strike. Cersei gazed at Varys. You assured us you would learn if Sellsword companies began crossing the narrow sea for Daenerys. Have you heard anything? Varys spread his hands. My little birds are watchful, dear queen, yet so far they chirp only that she remains in the east, warring against the slave cities. The dragons, if dragons they truly are, could be a fearsome asset, but it takes time to cross the sea with an entire army. We may have some months yet. Baelish gave a thin smile. Months can vanish quickly if one is not prepared. Renly drummed his fingers on the table. Then we prepare. We strengthen the Westerlands. The Tyrells keep watch over the southern approach. The Stormlands remain vigilant by sea. If we must face Stannis again, we'll do so with overwhelming might. The conversation continued, each lord offering suggestions. Some proposed an offensive against Dragonstone, blockading the island to starve out Stannis. Others advocated a wait-and-watch strategy, saving their strength in case the Targaryens emerged. Still others urged forging alliances with the Iron Islands or Dorne to prevent them from siding with any rebellion. Cersei listened, contributing sharp remarks when needed. She saw clearly how a single misstep could cascade into catastrophe. They would need cunning as much as swords. When the council finally adjourned, Cersei left the chamber with Renly. The corridor outside bustled with scribes carrying messages, guards posted at intervals. She could feel the tension in the air, the sense that war might erupt at any moment. Renly tugged her aside into a quieter alcove near a statue of the warrior. I need you to keep a close eye on the city while I make a decision about Dragonstone, he said softly. If an offensive is launched, I'll lead it personally. Stannis is my brother, this must end by my own hand, one way or another. She frowned. You'd leave the capital? I would. Barristan can organize the men, but a king who won't face a threat himself loses respect. Stannis is cunning, but we can't let him pick away at us or gather more power from across the sea. Cersei hated the idea, remembering how vulnerable the city had felt each time the king was absent. But she saw the logic in it. Very well, she said at last. If you go, you'll ensure the city is fortified first. We won't be caught off guard. He nodded. I promise. I'll only move with the Tyrells' cooperation. If all goes well, we'll smash Stannis' holdouts, take the Red Priestess captive if we can, and let the realm see that rebellion earns only one reward. She exhaled, feeling a pang of unease beneath her outward resolve. Just be certain you succeed. Another near-run battle could embolden our enemies. He set a hand gently on her shoulder. We must take bold steps or we'll drown in caution. I trust your counsel to keep the realm steady while I'm gone. She placed her hand over his, meeting his gaze. Always. But come back with victory. The city needs you and so do I. They shared a lingering moment, then parted ways. While Renly immersed himself in the logistics of gathering a fleet, Cersei turned her attention to the city's readiness. She summoned the captains of the Gold Cloaks, the officers of the royal fleet, ensuring every wall and gatehouse had double the normal watch. She commanded more crossbowmen to train on the battlements, readied reserves of wildfire at strategic points in case Stannis tried the same trick. Quietly, she also reached out to Kevin Hill, Tywin's envoy, discussing how the Westerlands might reinforce the crown if the unthinkable happened. Each day brought fresh challenges. A new band of outlaws was caught trying to infiltrate the city with weapons, proclaiming some misguided loyalty to the one true king. Cersei had them hanged at once, making a public show of their execution. Fear was a potent tool. She spread word that any who dared raise arms against the rightful king would find no mercy. Let that be enough to deter copycats for a time at least. Meanwhile, the city prepared for the possibility of another conflict. The small folk grumbled at the rising cost of bread, the new taxes to fund the fleet. But Cersei made sure the new taxes hit mainly the merchant class and foreign traders, letting the poorest of kings landing off lightly so they would not riot. Bread and circuses, she had learned that lesson well from her father. As long as the people could eat, they would endure. Amid these preparations, Renly announced the official plan. He would gather a combined force of Stormlander and Tyrell ships at the Rose Road coast, then sail north to Dragonstone, blockading Stannis and forcing him into a pitched battle or a siege. If Stannis tried to break out, they would crush him at sea. If he tried to hide, they would starve him. Either way, it should end the threat. Cersei stood in the courtyard on the day Renly prepared to depart. Armed men assembled in ranks, carrying supplies for the campaign. Horses snorted, stamping the cobblestones. Banners fluttered, the crowned stag and the Tyrell rose mingling. Aemon, wide-eyed, clung to his mother's skirts, asking if father would be gone long. Joanna stood behind him, thumb in her mouth, watching the bustle without full understanding. Renly bent down to embrace them both. I'll be back soon, he said gently. When I return, we'll have peace again, and I'll take you both to see the sea from the highest tower. Aemon nodded solemnly, as if trying to be brave. Will you fight pirates again? Only if they try to hurt us, Renly replied. But we have strong knights on our side. Then he straightened to face Cersei. She inclined her head, voice low enough not to carry. Return victorious, she said. Show the realm that no one can stand against you. His eyes flicked over her face, a mixture of confidence and underlying worry. And you protect the city. I know you will. He clasped her hand, then stepped away, mounting his horse with practiced ease. The men gave a cheer as their king rode out of the courtyard, the column of soldiers and wagons trailing behind. Mace Tyrell and his knights followed in a swirl of green and gold. Cersei watched them go, her heart tight. She felt the old fear creeping in. If a single calamity befell them, everything they'd built could crumble. But she locked that fear away behind the practiced mask she wore so well. Time passed in slow drips after the king's departure. Letters arrived from the fleet, describing their progress along the coast, how they planned to converge on Dragonstone. Cersei presided over the city with a firm grip, stamping out any rumor of weakness. Still, tension coiled in the streets. People remembered the last war and dreaded another. Blackwater Bay sometimes glimmered with far-off sails, but none dared assault the city with so many archers posted. One dusk, as she walked along the battlements, she spied flickers of torchlight on the horizon near the sea. The shape of ships was barely visible, but the watchers identified them as crown-loyal vessels on patrol. She stared at them until her eyes blurred, wishing she could see beyond the curve of the coast to where Renly might already be engaging Stannis. Perhaps the battle had begun, or perhaps it was days away yet. She cursed the slow speed of ravens. A full moon came and went. Then, at last, a raven arrived bearing the royal seal. The scribe who delivered it trembled in excitement, for it was marked urgent. Cersei tore it open, her heart pounding. Renly's message was brief but vital. We have laid siege to Dragonstone. Stannis resists fiercely. His red priestess casts a shadow over the sea, but we hold strong. A storm battered us last night, some say conjured by Lawleress might. We lost a few ships, yet the blockade remains. The men are resolute. If Stannis will not yield, we'll assault the fortress soon. Pray for our swift victory. Our Baratheon. Cersei exhaled. So the siege had begun. She felt a pang of unease at the mention of storms possibly conjured by sorcery. She did not want to believe in such things, but too many strange tales circulated around that red woman. Still, the blockade held. That was what mattered. If Renly could press the siege relentlessly, Stannis might break. The next week seemed endless. No fresh birds arrived. Cersei channeled her anxiety into controlling the city with an iron fist. She met with the small council daily, ensuring they heard no sign of Sellsword landings or infiltration. Baelish claimed everything was calm. He had no real proof, of course, but he was good at reading the city's undercurrents. Varys claimed no news of Targaryen movements across the sea. It was an uneasy calm, pregnant with tension. Then, on a night with stars scattered across a clear sky, horns sounded from the bay. A small cluster of ships approached the city bearing the golden stag banner. Cersei rushed to the battlements, flanked by gold cloaks, straining to see. The vessels docked in the quay below, and from them emerged men in battered armor, many bandaged and limping. At their head was a knight carrying the Baratheon standard. He strode to the gates, demanding entry. The guards recognized him as Ser Balon Swan, one of Renly's knights. Within the hour, Ser Balon stood in the throne room, half collapsing from fatigue. Cersei had him given water and a moment to catch his breath. Lords and courtiers gathered, dread in their eyes. Finally, Balon Swan spoke. "My queen," he said, voice hoarse, "I bring word from the siege of Dragonstone. We have suffered a terrible setback." A hush fell. Cersei felt her stomach twist. "Speak plainly." He swallowed. 3 nights ago, the Red Priestess unleashed a storm of unnatural ferocity. The wind lashed our ships, the waves rose to monstrous heights. We lost many vessels. In the chaos, Stannis's men launched flaming arrows and pitch at our fleet. King Renly fought bravely. Her heart thudded. "Tell me he is alive." Ser Balon nodded hurriedly. "He lives, my queen, though wounded. He was struck by a broken spar when his flagship's mast fell. The healers tended him, but we had no choice but to break off the blockade. Stannis and his men seized the moment to sally out. We fought them off, but the siege collapsed. King Renly ordered a retreat to regroup and save what ships we could. We gathered at Massey's Hook, but our losses were dire." He lowered his head. "The king bade me sail here and request reinforcements, as well as fresh supplies and a royal surgeon if possible." Cersei closed her eyes, a wave of relief that Renly lived, warring with fury that they had been undone by storms and sorcery. "He's wounded, but stable?" "Yes, your grace. The healers say he'll recover, though he's been feverish." A stunned whisper passed through the onlookers. Mace Tyrell, who had remained in the city, turned pale. Cersei felt her thoughts race. This was a disaster. The crown had thrown its might against Stannis, only to be battered by freak storms and forced into retreat. All the illusions of invincibility they'd cultivated might now unravel. She had to act swiftly to maintain control. She drew a calming breath, forcing composure. "Ser Balon, you shall rest, then we will speak in detail. I will summon the small council to arrange fresh support for the king. This is but a setback. We shall reinforce our fleet, supply our armies, and see to the king's swift recovery. Stannis has won nothing but a temporary reprieve." Balon Swan bowed, relief shining in his tired eyes. "Thank you, my queen." As the knights led him away, Cersei turned to the assembled lords, letting her voice ring with authority. "Spread the word. King Renly lives, though wounded, and we shall stand by him. This storm was no natural thing. It was the work of dark powers, and we will not allow it to break our resolve. The traitor Stannis hides behind shadows and witchcraft, but the rightful king will prevail." She saw nods, but also glimpses of fear. Out of the corner of her eye, she noted the subtle grimace on Mace Tyrell's face, the apprehension in the gazes of lesser lords. It would take more than speeches to shore up their confidence now. War had turned uncertain, and the realm had an enemy who apparently commanded storms. Cersei willed herself to remain steady. If Renly was feverish, who would truly lead the next wave of strategy? It fell to her to keep the realm from despair. She wasted no time in calling a council. Mace Tyrell arrived, trembling with a mixture of anger and worry. Baelish, Varys, Pycelle, and Barristan gathered as well. The news from Balon Swan was relayed in detail. Some spoke of sending immediate reinforcements, more ships, more men. Others argued that they could not simply throw more forces into a cursed storm. Could they lure Stannis out to open ground instead? Did they risk dividing their forces and leaving the city unguarded? Round and round the discussion went. Finally, Cersei silenced them with a raised hand. We must remember. The king remains near Massey's Hook, reorganizing. We cannot decide anything without word from him. Meanwhile, we must quell panic in the city. Let no man say that we cower in fear of black magic. We remain strong. The Tyrell banners will bolster our navy, and we'll wait for the king's instructions on whether to attempt another strike or to shift tactics. Mace Tyrell exhaled shakily. Yes, yes, we'll see to it that more ships are prepared. But if this magic continues, what then? Barristan's voice was grim. We must trust in steel and numbers. Even sorcery has its limits. Stannis cannot conjure a hurricane every day. In time, we will find a way to best him. After the meeting, Cersei retreated to her solar, thinking furiously. She almost wished for her father's presence. Tywin would have known exactly how to respond with brutal decisiveness. But he remained in the west, presumably dealing with his own troubles. She would have to manage on her own, as she had so many times before. Days passed. More battered ships filtered back to the city, each bearing men who told stories of lightning-laced storms and freakish winds swirling with red-tinged clouds. The rumor that Stannis had sold his soul to some fire god spread like wildfire itself. Some whispered that he was unstoppable. Cersei stamped out such talk by ordering punishments for doomsayers. Let them lose a tongue or a finger if they insisted on fueling panic. Fear was only useful when it served her ends, not when it undermined morale. At last, another raven arrived bearing Renly's seal. This one, penned in a shaky hand, confirmed he was recovering from his wounds. He had moved with his men toward the Stormlander coast, away from immediate danger. He would not attempt another blockade of Dragonstone without fresh resources and a better strategy. For the time being, he wanted to regroup, fortify the Stormlands, and see if Stannis might be baited into open combat on the mainland. Cersei read the letter in the privacy of her chambers, a lump in her throat. She was relieved he was well enough to write, but the sense of frustration bled through every word. He had tried to bring Stannis to heel, only to lose ships and men to uncanny storms. A lesser man might give up, but she knew Renly would not abandon the fight. Still, the realm could not endure an endless war of attrition. She penned a reply, urging him to consider a more cautious approach, perhaps consulting with lords skilled in subterfuge, someone who might sabotage Stannis from within. No strategy was too dishonorable when the very stability of the throne was at stake. In the meantime, she resolved to keep a stranglehold on the capital's loyalty. She doubled the city watch, stationed men at every gate, and had pyromancers produce more wildfire in case Stannis tried to sail up the Blackwater again. She tightened her grip on the treasury, raising more coin through careful taxes on foreign trade while ensuring the small folk did not starve. Tyranny, yes, but measured tyranny, she told herself. A queen must be harsh when threatened by chaos. The Tyrells grumbled but complied. Mace pressed for swift vengeance, but with Renly away he had no direct authority to push the crown into another immediate assault. Some suspected Mace might attempt to become regent if the king did not return soon, but Cersei wielded enough power and enough intimidation that he dared not overstep. She kept Lady Olenna close, exchanging polite barbs. Olenna Tyrell was no fool, and she recognized that the alliance with the Lannisters was crucial if the Tyrells hoped to remain the second most powerful force in the realm. And so the uneasy stalemate stretched on. Stannis stayed holed up on Dragonstone, occasionally sending out raiding ships to test the coastline. Renly and his men guarded the Stormlands, rebuilding their naval strength. The city braced for disaster but found none immediate. Whispers of Daenerys Targaryen receded slightly, no new sightings indicated she was on the move. The Greyjoys, for once, seemed preoccupied with their own petty squabbles. And so day after day the realm existed in a state of tense vigilance, waiting for a blow that might come from any quarter. Cersei, in the midst of this vigil, felt herself growing harder, more resolute. She had once believed that securing the throne would be enough, that as queen she would shape the future unchallenged. But the reality of rule was a constant war against 100 threats. She did not flinch from it, rather she embraced it. She had never been a shrinking violet, she was a lioness, and this was the jungle in which she prowled. On the nights she found time to be with her children, reading them stories or simply watching them sleep, she was reminded why she fought. Aemon's face had grown more thoughtful, as if he sensed the worry around him. Joanna, bright-eyed and curious, would soon turn 4. They were the living promise of a Baratheon Lannister dynasty, and she would kill or manipulate anyone who threatened that promise. If the price of peace was 1,000 cunning deeds, she would pay it. If the price was more blood, she would spill it. Her father's lessons had taken root in her heart long ago, and the further she walked this path, the less doubt she felt about her own ruthlessness. At times, she stood on the Red Keep's highest battlements at dawn, gazing over the city as it awoke. The gulls shrieked over the bay, the fishing boats put out to sea, and the myriad rooftops below began to stir. This was her kingdom now, at least in all but name. Renly might wear the crown, but with him away, she was the voice that commanded each day's decisions. Let men call her cunning, manipulative, or even monstrous behind her back. It mattered little. So long as she held them in thrall, so long as they feared or respected her enough to follow, she had won. She recalled the day Tywin Lannister had set her betrothal to Renly in motion years and years ago. At the time it had felt strange, a disappointment that she would not wed Robert, the heir. But how much better this match had proven. Robert had been a brute, a drunken soul forever pining for a dead woman. Renly was gentler, more amenable, and though he faced challenges, he did so with a spirit that did not crush her own. She had forged her path from that single decision onward, and she did not regret it. Another raven arrived at last, near the turn of the season. The king would return soon. His wound had healed enough for travel, though he still walked with a limp. Stannis had retreated again into his fortress, rumored to be planning something new with that Red Priestess. For now, the immediate threat to the Stormlands had subsided. Renly wished to regroup in King's Landing, gather fresh counsel, perhaps prepare a new campaign with Lannister gold if Tywin would supply it. Cersei ordered preparations for his return. She arranged for a subdued welcome, not a grand parade, a wise choice, as the mood in the city was not one for feasting. Instead, she commanded that the streets be cleaned, that the watch keep order, that an honor guard receive the king at the gates. Word spread quickly, rousing flickers of hope among the small folk. The king was not broken, just delayed by a treacherous war. Perhaps, they whispered, all would be well. When at last Renly rode through the city gates, Cersei was there to greet him once more. This time, the cheers were muted, people were relieved, but they could see the battered condition of his men. Renly himself bore a scar above his brow, his complexion paler than before. Still, he sat upright in the saddle, offering a tired smile to the onlookers. Cersei stepped forward, her chin high. Their eyes met, and in that moment she recognized in him a deeper weariness than she had ever seen. War was chiseling away at the carefree youth he once was. He dismounted carefully, leaning on a squire's arm for balance, before embracing Cersei. She felt his breath against her hair, a shudder that hinted at either relief or lingering pain. "You're home," she murmured. "Yes," he replied softly. "Though for how long I cannot say." She drew back, noting the taut lines around his eyes. "Come inside. We'll see to your comfort. Eamon and Joanna are waiting eagerly for you." A flicker of warmth touched his face. "I've missed them. Let's not keep them waiting." They walked side by side into the Red Keep, the crowds parting. The lords who had accompanied Renly straggled behind, some limping, others lost in their own thoughts. Cersei heard murmurs about the storms, about Stannis, about how close they had come to being crushed at sea. But no one dared speak too loudly in her presence. Once in the privacy of the royal apartments, Renly sank into a cushioned chair with a faint groan. Eamon darted forward, clinging to his father's arm, and Renly mustered a grin for the boy. Joanna peered from behind a maid's skirts, then tottered forward to pat Renly's knee. The king scooped her up with his uninjured arm, pressing a tender kiss to her cheek. Cersei watched with quiet relief. Whatever else might happen, at least the father of her children had returned alive. If the realm demanded more battles, they could prepare. But at least they would do so together. After a few precious moments with the children, she had them ushered out by their nurse, leaving the adults to speak. She knelt beside Renly, eyeing the bandage beneath his tunic. "Let me see." He winced, undoing the laces enough to reveal a bruised shoulder and a healing slash across his ribs. "The mast fell, knocked me from the deck. I was half drowned before they hauled me out. The fever," he shook his head. "I'm lucky to be alive, if you believe in luck." She exhaled slowly. "We'll bring the best healers. In time, you'll regain your full strength. I trust you've also summoned them for your men." He nodded. "Aye. Many lost limbs or suffered burns from the pitch. The stories they tell. Some swear they saw shapes in the flames, shadows twisting as men screamed. It's shaken them, Cersei. This isn't a normal war." She gently touched his hair, smoothing it back. "No war is normal, but you'll show them it can still be won. We are not powerless before illusions and storms." Renly reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. I don't know how to fight shadows. Steel and siege engines can't do much against an enemy who wields the weather. We might need to consider other ways. Perhaps an alliance with the Red Priests from Volantis who oppose this ruler worship. Or consult with the maesters about arcane knowledge. Cersei almost scoffed at the notion of seeking spells to battle spells. She had always been practical. But then she remembered how close he had come to death at the Blackwater, and again at Dragonstone. If they faced an enemy who truly commanded dark forces, maybe they did need something beyond swords. She found the thought unnerving, even repugnant. But what choice did they have? We'll speak with the maesters, she said quietly. We'll find some method. However, in the meantime, the realm must see we have not lost our nerve. You'll rest, recover, and then appear in court with your usual assurance. He mustered a tight smile. You never let me falter, do you? I can't afford to, she said gently. Neither can you. They shared a moment of fragile closeness, a brief respite in a world that seemed poised on the brink of renewed chaos. Cersei felt her old determination rise again, an iron thread running through her. It did not matter if the foe was a rebellious Baratheon brother, a Targaryen with dragons, or a foreign priestess conjuring storms. She would not allow the throne to slip away from her or her children. The realm was shaped by those who refused to yield, and she would see it shaped in her favor. In the coming days, Renly appeared in public, his injury discreetly bandaged beneath lavish robes. The crowd saw a king who still smiled, still moved through the Red Keep with regal poise, though a bit slower. Cersei orchestrated small ceremonies of thanks for the men who returned, awarding tokens of honor, praising their valor. She had the bards compose new songs about courage in the face of cursed storms. Morale rose, if only slightly. Behind the scenes, they planned. Ravens flew to Pike, to Sunspear, even to the Vale, all carrying messages that reminded the great lords of their fealty to the Iron Throne. Cersei suspected that Dorne might require some special handling, given their old grievances with the Baratheons and Lannisters. But as long as no direct threat loomed from the south, they might remain neutral. Bit by bit, Cersei and Renly regrouped. Stannis hovered in the background, an ever-present danger, but temporarily stymied by the battered state of his own forces. Daenerys Targaryen remained a distant rumor. No new word suggested her imminent arrival. The Tyrells seemed mollified for now as Mace Tyrell basked in his Warden of the South title. The Westerlands under Tywin's watch had not erupted in any major revolt, so the realm lingered in an uneasy peace, the calm between storms. Cersei took heart in the knowledge that she and Renly, for all their trials, still held the throne. The city bent to her will, the lords bowed in her presence, and her children prospered under the roof of the Red Keep. She remembered standing in this castle as a young girl, newly betrothed, uncertain of her future. How far she had come from that timid uncertainty. She was queen, a power in her own right, shaped by conflict and tested by war. She gazed out one evening from her balcony, the city lights glittering like fallen stars. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the horizon, Stannis brooded with his Red Witch, and a silver-haired Targaryen might be nursing dragons on foreign soil. But within these walls, her authority reigned. She was not naive enough to believe the threats would vanish. War had a way of returning, sometimes when least expected. But for now, in the hush of night, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had seized power, and she would not relinquish it. Renly's voice drifted to her from the bedchamber. "Cersei." She turned, letting the night breeze lift her golden hair. "Yes. I can't sleep without hearing your plans for tomorrow. You're always the one with plans." There was a half-laugh in his tone, tinged with weariness. She stepped back into the room, smiling faintly. "Then let's discuss them, my king," she said, closing the shutters behind her. "Let's plan how we shall keep our hold on this throne, no matter what sorcery or dragons or misguided rebellions try to tear it from us." And so they talked late into the night, forging strategies in whispered confidences, determined to keep the realm in their grasp. In those long hours, the shadows flickered on the stone walls, hinting at the battles yet to come, the alliances yet to be tested, and the cunning that might be required of them both. But in the hush between words, Cersei felt her resolve burn bright as the fiercest flame. She was a lioness, and she had found her throne alongside the stag who wore the crown. Whatever storms the morrow might bring, she would not yield. She would guide the 7 kingdoms with the lethal grace of a queen who understood that power belonged to those who dared claim it and were ruthless enough to keep it.